All right, recording in progress. What?
It's good to see you, Carl.
It's very good to see you. We had a great meeting this morning with some of our leaders in Uganda. Or they're here, but preparing to go back in Uganda. So they are, we've helped them to start what we had called in the beginning resource centers, and now they are going to call them, I don't know if they're going to call them ACTS training centers, but instead of resource centers, they're going to call them training centers. And they are now in the process of training their own leaders to do what we do here. So we are replicating what we do here ×4 in Uganda. So that is exciting. And they've got guys that are more than qualified to what our desire is that they take their leadership and take each topic off our syllabus, and wherever they're strong in those areas, to study the written material, study the videos, and then they start teaching, and they'll do a better job because they know the context of their own country, of their own city, of their own congregation. And so we have put the seed, and now they're going to grow it into something that we could never do. So that's the goal of missions anyway. You know, there are so many things that we teach here, and the best example is probably like the demographics. They don't have the software, they don't have all it, but yet when we taught it, several of their pastors grabbed some leaders in their church and literally went through their community and did a survey, a demographic survey by foot.
Wow.
And one of the pastors, Vincent's an incredible guy. And he said that, I think I shared this with y'all, but he said that they found out that feminine hygiene products were desperately needed in their area, and over 600 women that they reached out to and provided those things.
Wow.
So very practical, natural thing, that yet it showed that the church came out and met that need. So all of that came from a demographic study in their community. So
Well, that's the way we use it.
How big is Uganda?
well, Uganda's pretty big, but Kampala, the city they're in, is about, in the daytime, it's got about 2.9 million, 3 million people. It's like Dallas, Fort Worth. So at nighttime, I think it's about 1.7 million people. So in the daytime, people come into the city from to work, and then so at nighttime the city decreases almost by 50%. So
Maybe religion over there.
no,
It's hard to say.
yeah, it's hard.
Everybody there is a Christian by birth.
Well, not everybody, but a lot of them. Yeah, they identify kind of like Catholicism here.
Yeah.
A lot of people will identify even though they've never stepped foot in the church. They were born into a Catholic family. So because everywhere we went, people were like, yeah, I'm a Christian.
But then you got a lot of Pentecostals there. You got a lot of
Church of Christ.
Church of Christ.
I mean,
I've seen all the branches,
Yeah.
different branches, because even the Jehovah's Witnesses had a place there.
Right. So they're evangelized, trust me. And these guys are doing the best to correct some doctrinal issues and the true gospel out there. So, well, let's pray. I know Vidala said that her job has been hard this week, and I told her no problem, stay home and rest. And so she's gonna stay home and rest, and we'll pray for her.
My mom also couldn't come today.
Okay, if I'm still sick,
She just got out from being sick, but rain is not gonna help her.
right?
So then
right.
she decided to stay home.
So we'll continue to pray for her.
But she pledged that she is gonna be watching us through YouTube and catch up with the classes that she needs.
I thought Mike would be here, so I'm not sure. He usually texts me. He may show up late, but I don't know what's going on.
He's
with
not a
him.
late person though.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's not usually late, and he hasn't sent me anything. So let's pray, and then we'll let Brother Randy. He's not a stranger to us. He may give a little bit of an introduction, but he led our how to do a business meeting and all those things a few months back. And so let's pray and then we'll get started. Lord, it is so good to be in your presence. And Lord, the purpose for us always meeting in your name is to see you glorified and lifted up. I just pray that tonight your spirit would move, you clear our hearts, clear our minds. Lord, speak through Randy, helping to teach us something that we did not know about ministering to those who have lost a loved one, the ordinances, these areas that we practice in our church, and many people don't fully understand. So Lord, I just pray you use him. I pray for Wadalis. I know her job can be very physical at times, and I just pray that you give her rest tonight. I pray for Mike and his group, whatever's going on with them, Lord, that you would just meet their needs. And with Brother Ed, he's not here tonight as well. I just lift him up to you. But Lord, those who are here, I just pray that you touch their hearts, touch their minds, and that they would learn something new tonight to take back to their church. We love you, Lord. We praise you. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Brother Randy, it's all yours. These were some of the things that I had. Oh, okay. So I made the copies. I don't know if that's what you've got.
Most probably. Let's see if there's anything else. That's it. Perfect.
And you let me know when you want to tack that. I will get on.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right, well, glad to be back with you guys. Yeah. It's always exciting to be
Enjoy the
here.
last class.
Yeah, thanks. And so I enjoy our time together for sure. And last time we talked about budgeting and business meetings and a lot of the practical administrative roles and responsibilities that pastors have. But this evening, we're going to really be talking about practical aspects of preaching ministry and ministry in general, with regard to ordinances, weddings, and funerals, preaching those aspects of our ministry. So we're going to spend most of our time this evening on weddings and funerals, because those are, those areas of our ministry that take a lot of time when we encounter them. They're not, obviously something we do every week, but they do take a lot of time. So we're not going to diminish the importance of ordinances, but there's just less preparation involved in those as opposed to preparing for weddings and funerals. So as we begin, just a quick raise of your hand survey. Have you ever performed a baptism? Anybody have ever performed a baptism? All right. Presided over the Lord's Supper. Anybody? Okay, great. Conducted or helped conduct a funeral. All right. And anybody officiate a wedding? Okay, good. All right. So one has done all, and then some have done some of the others. So hopefully we'll learn some new things together this evening. But I want us to begin by briefly considering the two ordinances of a Baptist church: baptism and the Lord's Supper. Those are the two. They're important in the life of the church. If you think about it, these ordinances really predate the New Testament. They were established as a way of signifying membership in the body of believers and were significant avenues for communicating the gospel. So as far as those ordinances are concerned, vital, and they've been around, before the church
Prior to
even
that, it
existed.
wasn't done.
It wasn't done in the way that we do them as far as Christians are concerned. Obviously Jewish, Lord's Supper comes out of the Passover meal, that kind of idea. And then baptism, there was some ritual washings with the Jewish faith, but no baptisms, until John the Baptist came along. That was kind of a new thing for someone to actually be baptized, especially for the forgiveness of sins, and repentance after having repented of their sins. So as far as preaching about the ordinances, I think I can only really remember one, maybe two times I preached on baptism itself. And then, of course, the Lord's Supper, we'll talk about that in just a minute. I kind of made some changes in my ministry, but you know, really like specific sermons. Here's a sermon on baptism. Here's a sermon on the Lord's Supper. Very few specific sermons on those. Not something I just made a habit of doing, but some practical insights from a pastor's perspective. You know, I served as a pastor for over 20 years. Of course, been a Christian for longer than that, since I was 15 years old, so almost 40 years. But as far as baptism is concerned, I'll just give you kind of the way I handled things when I was a pastor. You know, prior to baptizing anybody, I always met with them to discuss their decision to follow Christ. You know, unless I was the one who led them to make that profession of faith, you know, walk with them through that process, I would always meet with them and talk with them about, you know, what does baptism really mean for the individual, and try to help them understand more about baptism. And then prior to the baptism service, I would always meet with that person that I was baptizing. That gives you another opportunity just to impress upon them the meaning and the importance of baptism. It also allowed me to walk through every step. This is what I'm going to do. This is what we're going to say. This is where you're going to stand. You know, and then when everything's completed, then we're going to, you know, you'll walk out this way, and I'll stay and I'll pray, and, you know, those kinds of things. I would tell them everything that I would do, especially, you know, with little kids, but even some adults, you know, some adults are scared of the water. And so, you know, I would tell them, okay, here's how you hold your hands. Here's where I'm going to place my hand, and just try to make them as comfortable as possible. But, you know, and I would always tell them, okay, you know, you're going to take your left hand, you're going to hold your right wrist, and then you're going to take these two fingers and you're going to pinch your nose. And I'm like, you know, if you get water up your nose, it's your fault. You know, I'm not going to hold your nose, you know. And they usually did a pretty good job. But during the baptism, I would always read a passage of scripture, you know, related to baptism, of course. One of my favorites is Romans 6, about how, you know, we leave behind, you know, it's Paul's explanation really of baptism. And I like the Message paraphrase of Romans chapter 6. And it says this is what happened in baptism. When we went under the water, I would oftentimes change it, you know, when we go under the water, make it more present tense. But it says, when we went under the water, we left the old country of sin behind. When we came up out of the water, we entered into a new country of grace, a new life in a new land. That's what baptism into the life of Jesus means. When we are lowered into the water, it's like the burial of Jesus. When we are raised up out of the water, it's like the resurrection of Jesus. Each of us is raised into a light-filled world by our Father, so that we can see where we're going in our new grace sovereign country. So I would read that a lot. I just thought that was a beautiful picture. It brings to mind, you know, Jesus' death, his burial, his resurrection, and you know, buried in the likeness of Christ. A lot of times pastors will say, raised to walk in the newness of life. And then I would always remind the congregation about the true meaning of baptism before I ever baptized the candidate. I read that passage of scripture. I would say, you know, baptism is one of the most important steps a new believer can take, and I would always say, you know, it's an outward commitment, or an outward sign of an inward commitment. And I would use my wedding ring as an illustration. I would say, you know, this wedding ring I received from my wife, you know, when we were married 30 years ago, and you know, it doesn't make me married. I can be married and not wear one, but it tells everyone else that I have made a commitment to myself to one person for the rest of my life. That's what baptism is like. We're taking this outward step of this inward reality. We can't see that person is different necessarily in their heart, but when they make that profession of faith, when they this is signifying to the world, hey, I'm making a commitment of myself to one person for the rest of my life. So that's, you know, I never, like I said, I never or rarely ever preached a sermon on baptism. Always included it, but when I had the opportunity to baptize someone, then it really was kind of like a sermon. You know, the baptism itself was like the message, and being able to impress upon the person being baptized the importance of it, the meaning of it, but also on the congregation, because there are people out there, especially when you're baptizing children, grandparents will come, aunts and uncles will come, it's a big event for a family, even if they're not Christians, they'll come. And so you have the opportunity to present the gospel to them, because they're there to see the baptism. On a real practical note, just be ready for anything, when you baptize somebody. I baptized somebody in freezing cold water outside. But I've also baptized in freezing cold water inside, the heater's broken or whatever it is. It's like, okay, just hold your breath when you come in the water because it's cold, and I remember, I don't remember who it was, when I was a little kid, I was baptized. I'm like, listen, the heater's not working. I said, it's cold. So when you step in the water, don't go. But when they stepped in the water, they're like,
On Instagram the other day about a baptism.
oh yeah.
And they were all excited and stuff. The girl was so excited. They went in, everything was great. She went under. When she went under, her shirt.
Oh,
up.
no. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, that was everybody. The lady was over her. She didn't know if she was gonna
Yeah.
laugh about it or
Right.
not.
That's why I say be prepared for anything, I baptized in super hot water. One time, the heater worked really, really well. Yeah, and we forgot to turn it off. Because usually we turn it off before, the service starts. Well, then it has time to kind of cool down, to still circulate the water, but it's not heating.
Boiling to death.
Well, I said, man, I'm like, it's like a hot tub. I'm like, it's not gonna bother you until I put your face under it. I'll be real fast, but it's gonna burn.
Right there. Brother Randy, one of the things to address what Kelly said, a lot of times when a person is new in their faith, I've had them come to be baptized in AC/DC church with Satan on it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that sounds crazy, but it's true. And also to keep, if a young lady comes in a white t-shirt, that's
Yeah.
not good either.
I always tell them, don't wear white.
Well, we went to robes. So no matter what they have on, and if you actually buy a baptismal robe, they're weighted.
At the bottom.
So when you walk in the water, they don't float up.
That's right.
And I had a lady in my church, the baptism robes are $100. You'll pay $150 for a baptism
That's
robe.
true.
And then when you've got extra large, medium, small, and children's sizes.
Correct.
That's a big investment.
That's right.
So I had a lady in my church who was very gifted in sewing. And I went and bought material and she sewed about a half a dozen sizes of baptism robe for us.
Nice.
And so he gave her the opportunity to use her gifts. And also, baptism robes save those issues that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I never had that, but there were times where I worried, but it was,
Yeah.
what they were wearing.
Because we have had young ladies, want to come into the water in a dress.
Dress, yeah,
But if they've got the baptism robe on, it doesn't matter.
that's correct, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so you gotta be prepared for anything. People may slip or fall.
Yes.
The pastor may slip or fall. I had one young lady that, when I baptized her, oh gosh, so funny. They got a picture of it, but in our new church at Holland, I didn't have to get into the baptistry. I could stand behind it and they would sit on a little seat in the baptistry and I would just lean them back, and I would tell them, okay, you're gonna lean back, I'll set you back up. Well, her feet were just as stiff as a board. Her feet went straight up when I laid her back, and everybody laughed. I mean, it really was funny,
No, we
That never happened before.
we baptized a gentleman in church a few years ago. He went to the Lord already, but took his shirt off. It looked like he had a sweater on.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
Scary.
Wow.
That's
Funny.
He's with the Lord now.
Yeah, well, one of the funniest baptisms I've ever seen is on Facebook, like video, but it's a Pentecostal church, we're talking about Pentecost, so they were all really excited, right? And there's a big, huge baptistry. And the pastor was in there and he was kind of a short fella, and the guy he was baptizing was big, tall, broad. But he had helpers, the pastor had helpers all around the baptistry, in the baptistry with him. It's so funny, you'll have to look it up, but I think it's something like the funniest baptism ever or something.
Check it out.
But the pastor, they clapped their hands and slapped him something, and then boom, down into the water. Well, he shot straight up after he was so excited
Uh-huh.
and just. Well, then that upset everybody, and the pastor going like this, and the pastor goes down. And one of the men around the edge reaches in and grabs the pastor's collar and jerks him up. Oh, and it's so funny. We're excited. He praised the Lord, but he never took everybody in the whole baptistry down.
How funny.
Oh, gosh, I love that video. I could watch it over and over and just laugh because it's fun. Because the pastor just lost control. I mean, that guy came up praising the Lord, and that guy, oh man. So you gotta be ready for anything. Lord's Supper. I have preached sermons on the Lord's Supper. What it means, the importance of it. And the Lord's Supper is typically, and at least in most Baptist churches that I grew up in, that I attended, even led, we would just do the Lord's Supper, once a quarter or more often if that's what the church had as their pattern. But typically, the Baptist pattern is once a quarter on the fifth Sunday, a lot of times, and just do it at the end. It doesn't matter what else has gone on in the service, you're going to end with the Lord's Supper. The church I attend now, Taylor Valley Baptist Church, we kind of do it
We do it monthly.
about halfway.
We do it first Sunday of the month.
First Sunday of every month.
Every month.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I mean, and like I said, if the church sets the pattern, right? So, but typically, it's at the end of the service, or even if it's at the middle of the service, but it's not necessarily tied in with everything else that you're doing. So my last several years that I was a pastor at First Baptist Church Holland, I would just plan the entire service around the Lord's Supper.
That's what I did.
I would, so it wasn't just added onto, it was kind of, everything flowed toward that, or even sometimes flowed away from it, because I would start
Right.
sometime. I mean, I would start with the Lord's Supper, really throw everybody off.
Right.
They didn't necessarily like that. But, I would I would usually pick a theme: forgiveness, redemption, grace, mercy, something. I would choose songs based on that. I would choose scripture passages that people would read. The sermon would be about grace or mercy or forgiveness or whatever. And then, then the Lord's Supper would be pointed toward that aspect, of forgiveness. And we would talk about, what forgiveness looks like based on the fact that Jesus
Is
Christ.
there any what do you say that? Requisition to Lord's Supper? Can anybody take the Lord's Supper?
Well, it's every church makes that decision for themselves. Historically, Baptist churches, I'm going to say 30, 40 years ago, it was only for members. Literally, you had to be a member of that congregation. And a lot of times the way that you knew, or a lot of times even today, if they have that kind of belief that it's only for their members, they'll do it on a Sunday night.
Right, on a different day, yeah.
Because then most people don't, if you're not a member, you don't come on Sunday night necessarily. So they'll only do it on Sunday night. Or a Wednesday night, something like that. But, our church always said, if you're a baptized believer in Jesus Christ, and so if you were Methodist or Pentecostal or Church of Christ or whatever, it didn't matter how you were baptized, but if you believe in Jesus Christ and had been baptized, we invited everyone to participate. I would say you're welcome to join us. Then each person could decide if they wanted to at that point, but really it is by the church's designation of when, how often, who can partake of the Lord's Supper, who's responsible for leading. We redid our Constitution and bylaws years ago, and we put in there that the pastor would lead the Lord's Supper, or whomever the deacon body would designate. Because if there was no pastor at the time, then you couldn't observe the Lord's Supper. Because that's what it said. The old bylaw said it had to be the pastor of the church. Well, if you're without a pastor for some reason, you can't observe the Lord's Supper. So we put that, they understood after we got to that point, but they were like, well, no, it's gotta be the pastor. I'm like, well, but it could be your interim pastor, or it could be, the pastor is filling in that Sunday. I mean, I've even done that since I've left full-time ministry, First time I ever filled in for a little church, near Elgin, they said, it's been several months since we've had the Lord's Supper, and this is gonna be the Lord's Supper Sunday. Would you be willing to lead it? I'm like, yeah, sure, But, so, each church really has a choice. And most of the time, your bylaws or your constitution will state who can, how often, those kinds of things. So, and really, that's leads right into those kinds of, those practical things I had in my notes, plan when you're going to have it, how often. Be prepared also, I want to say, be prepared for anything to happen, even during the Lord's Supper. Funny things happen, even during the Lord's Supper. I was at a little church out in West Texas, north of Abilene, and the deacons, they always prepared the Lord's Supper, and they prepared in advance, and I would, get there and just see that, okay, it's there, of course, they would cover it with the sheet and all that. And, we observed the Lord's Supper that day. Well, when we took the juice had been expired for quite a while. So it was fermented, it would taste it tasted so bad, but you got to keep a straight face, but everybody else was like, God.
You poison them?
Yeah. I'm like, okay, mental note. Somebody needs to check to make sure it's not expired, or whatever reason, it shouldn't have.
Right while they're pouring it.
Yeah, exactly. Just pour a little bit before you. So the deacon who helped.
Are they
that
taking
day,
4
he's
shots
like,
at a time?
I'm so sorry. I should have tested to make sure it was ready, and I was like,
They said it.
no.
Afterwards, I mentioned.
Oh, we talked about it. Lots of discussion about how horrible it was. The one funniest one was also in that same church. There was a deacon and his wife usually that did the preparation. It's different, and they passed it around to different deacons. And so one Sunday, I get there and the elements are out there on the table. They're all covered up. I'm like, this is good. And she forgot. So she filled the top tray with juice, but she forgot to fill the bottom tray. It had cups, but she didn't put any juice in it. And she knew this the whole service. She realized that she hadn't put any juice in it, but she didn't tell anybody. And so, here we are at the end of the service, and I'm, we pray, and, I'm passing out, fixing to take the cup and give it to the small church. I mean, it's about this big. But, I pick up that tray of all the juice, but it seems like we had a pretty big crowd that Sunday, It may have been close to Easter. I don't know. There was a lot of people. So I pick up that tray and I move it, to give it to the deacon next to me. And I look down and those are empty. And they said my face was just, this is my first church. And I was like, shocked.
Fill it up.
So I didn't know what to do. I'm kind of, frozen. And one of the other deacons saw, what had happened, and he grabbed it, and left the auditorium to go to the fellowship hall. So they used that one tray until it was empty, and they brought in the other one, and filled it. Oh my gosh. And she just was mortified. I'm so sorry. I was like, you should have told somebody, because we could have been like, excuse us, we're gonna just take this tray and go do that while, something else was going on. Anyway, so you just gotta be prepared. You never know.
As we sing this hymn.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, we could have done, let's sing another hymn, or whatever. We could have, extended the service a little bit, but.
My favorite communion story isn't really communion, but it does pertain to it. So I was a youth pastor, and we were having a youth gathering, and I don't even remember what it was, but we had hot dogs. And so, Corey was one of my football players, big old boy, like a 8 hot dog eating. Oh, wow. And he grabs the mustard, and when he opened it and squirted it onto his hot dog, it was grape juice.
No,
The reason is because the deacon used a French's mustard empty container that.
To
had been
fill
cleaned
the
out
cup?
hard, and he would barely crack it and then just squeeze it into the cup. And so after that,
which is not a bad idea.
it's a great idea, but we had to label it in court.
Right.
Pastor Carl? What's wrong with this mustard? I came over there and I was like, that's great. But it was, he ate the hot dog, by the way, but anyway, that was a funny story.
The missionary trip that we took to Wisconsin, remember? That we went together to Wisconsin with you.
Mhm.
There was one church that we visited. We didn't go with you guys, but we went to a church that we got invited. And then they were not serving grape juice, they were actually serving wine.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, the
But it
church
was-
was very
but
happy.
it was-
Red Solo cups.
Amen.
Oh, well, that's not a bad deal. That's not anything wrong with that.
No, nothing wrong about it.
Unless you don't know.
Right.
They didn't, they had two tables.
Yes.
Like one table, I guess it was the juice, the other table was the wine.
Okay, so
So all mine are-
Right.
all-
Right.
There's a guy, it's like, "Ooh, Pastor, you brought the good stuff out at the end."
Yeah, exactly.
I'm wondering who takes the leftovers?
Yeah, who takes the leftovers?
Mm.
That's right.
I'm saying this is wine and this.
That was not in the Baptist church, was
What's the, it was.
it? It was.
In the Wisconsin Baptist.
Yeah.
They're different, they're different.
Hey, they had the cheese out there too.
I thought it was the cracker, instead of the cracker, they used the cheese curds.
I ain't got it, friends, we're probably going. Those Mexicans are crazy.
They drink too much wine. Well, the first time I went to Israel back when I was in college. We had the Lord's Supper together a couple of times, you know. We didn't know, we were in Jerusalem one weekend, and so our group, it was Church of Christ, Baptist, you know, a variety of people gathered together, all students, but you know, they used wine for because that's all they could get. They forgot to get the grape juice, but the wine store was open or whatever, you know. And apparently it was the cheapest wine they could buy, you know, but they didn't tell anybody, you know. So here we are, a bunch of college students, Church of Christ, you know, very conservative Church of Christ, conservative Baptist, you know.
Uh-huh.
We were shocked. But the second time they did it, we were like, we're ready now. Okay.
It's
yeah.
really interesting because it's a matter of perception. A former pastor of ours, he traveled to Europe where they will actually take communion with actual wine because it's normal.
That's
for
all
them
they
in
do,
their
yeah.
culture.
That's in their
And that's
culture.
where it comes from.
Yeah, they drink that instead of
Now,
water.
as soon as he asks for coffee, they go like, "Are you a Christian?"
Oh, no.
Because coffee is a drug. And we don't drink coffee.
The caffeine.
I mean, I don't know where he went, but they told him that. So he says that it's a matter of cultural perception sometimes.
Right.
Interesting.
As Christians, you know, they.
I need to know what country that is. It's not going. I need the coffee.
It doesn't say anywhere in the Bible that
Right.
you can't drink no coffee.
That's right, that's
Is
right.
that gonna be a story straight in your
It's our job to make.
Make it every morning, that's right. All right, so let's shift gears. Like I said, we're not gonna spend a lot of time on baptism or supper, not because they're not important, but just because they don't take as much of our time and energy as funerals and weddings. So these two aspects of ministry, funerals and weddings, are probably some of the most draining moments in our ministry, time consuming for sure, that we are asked to perform as ministers. Thankfully, they don't happen every week, every month even necessarily. But at the same time, while they are very draining, they can also be some of the most productive moments in our ministry. You know, we can impact people. We can when they're going through very difficult for a funeral, very difficult time, or a wedding, a very happy, joyous time, then we have that opportunity to bring together those events and the gospel, and really not just the opportunity, we have the responsibility to bring those two together, the gospel and whatever the event is. So, they are moments that people remember for a lifetime. They will remember that you performed the wedding of their granddaughter or their son or daughter or whoever it was. They will remember that you performed the funeral of their grandparents or their dad or their son, whoever it is. They will never forget that you took the time, that you led the service. And so they are two very critical junctures in people's lives, and they're extremely important. And so I want us to spend, quite a bit of time talking about both of them. So let's begin with the funerals. And we're going to be talking specifically about preaching a funeral, preaching the message, or preparing for a funeral. The time that it takes to prepare and conduct a funeral is really the reason that funerals can be one of the most challenging aspects of a pastor's ministry. It takes a lot of your time to minister to a family in those moments. You have to prepare the funeral message. You have to attend the visitation. You have to conduct the funeral. You have to officiate if there's a graveside, grave, they're going to bury whether it's ashes or a body, then you have to, prepare for that graveside rites. Oftentimes there's a meal involved either before or after. And, they kind of expect the pastor to be there for those things. So, and all of that's being done while your regular sermon preparation needs to be done. Providing guidance for whatever other ministries are going on. Having time with your family, those kinds of things. If you're bivocational, you got your job too, on top of all these other ministry responsibilities. So lots of things going on, lots of time required and effort. And so most of the funeral preparation really has to be done in the evenings or at night. Visitation is typically scheduled in the evening. And so that reduces the amount of time that you have to spend with your family. So it can be stressful. So one of the ways to kind of combat that I found was to have several funeral sermons already written, and just use those. And there are funeral sermons from other pastors that you can find that, I would take those and use those as a guide. I wouldn't necessarily preach those exact messages because they weren't written for the person that I'm using them for, but they might be the right situation or circumstance, and they would guide me. So most of my funeral sermons really are based off of a man named Paul Powell. His sermons that I received, he published them in little books. And Paul Powell, Powell, he was pastor at Green Acres Baptist Church in Tyler for a long time. Then he went to he was actually pastor at First Baptist Church Troy. A long time.
Bell Falls.
Oh, in Bell Falls?
That's where he started.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Troy and Green Acres.
Okay, and then he was the president of what we know now as Guidestone, but it was back then the annuity board of the Southern Baptist Convention, the retirement part of ministers in the Baptist Church. And then he eventually became the first president of Truett Seminary at Baylor in Waco. So anyway, he did a marvelous job with sermons for funerals, and he published several books. They were just little thin paperback books, and Joy Comes in the Morning was one of them, and funeral messages. I think that wasn't very creative titles or anything like that, but he would categorize them: a funeral for a dedicated church member, a funeral for a child, a funeral for someone who commits suicide, a funeral for someone who's been ill for a long time, a funeral for someone who died suddenly. he would categorize them in the kind of table of contents, and so you could kind of, okay, well, here's the situation I'm facing, find one, oh, okay, well, that might work, and adapt it. Or I would just sometimes take his point, take the passage of scripture that he used, take the points that he made, and then write the sermon, the way I would write it, but use his points. And they were so helpful. And then, I've used those same funeral outlines for years, especially for people who were not members of the church or I didn't know well. They were very helpful because there are times when, I'm sure Carl's had this experience where the funeral home calls and says, hey, this family needs a pastor to do this service. Can you show up, Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock and do the service? And you've never met the family, maybe not even had time to talk to the family about their loved one, and you got to say something.
That's what I did this Saturday.
Oh, really?
So, last week I got a call that I preach a sermon, could I work the sermon on Saturday? And I said, yes. And then she texted me back the next day and said, the family wants to know if we'll provide the minister, will you preach the funeral? So I not only worked it.
Oh, really?
Got time to go down, I preached it, and then I did the graveside, 40-minute drive to Post Oak Cemetery in Oglesby.
Yeah.
A 40-minute drive back. And so, yeah, I never met the family before in my life, and so I met with them on Friday night.
Oh, yeah.
And they talked about,
When they came to the visitation or what?
I met them an hour before,
Mhm.
so that I would have my time, and
Right.
that didn't take much of their time. And they kept talking about how the deceased was always serving people, opening her house, loved to have family over, loved to bring it over. And so I based the sermon that I basically said, she has always been hospitable, always opened her house. But now she's living in the promise
Mhm.
of John 14:6.
Yeah.
Our Father has
Has a house.
a house.
Yeah.
And he's prepared a place for her,
Mhm.
and now she's the guest, and she's heard, well done, my faithful servant. So I use that
Yeah.
passage,
Yeah.
and I based it off of what I listened to them talk about.
Yeah.
Well, and that it's a good, example, good segue into what we're gonna talk about, but just some real practical considerations when you, when you know a funeral is coming or, a death is expected, so here's some practical considerations as a minister. If you know, or if there's a death that's expected, you've got somebody in your congregation who is sick, who's near death, go before they die. Just go to their home before they pass away. Some of my biggest regrets in ministry are times I did not visit a family who was in that period of waiting for that loved one to pass. Whether it was because I wasn't, able to, or, sometimes they're like, don't worry about coming, or whatever. They'll kind of be more worried about you than themselves. And they'll say, well, don't worry about coming. And so I didn't, but then, I always thought, man, I wish I had gone, just one more time to see him or her or whatever. So my biggest regrets would be not going, but some of my most significant ministry to a family occurred when I did go. Where they're waiting around in the hallway, at the hospital, or at the, a lot of times it's at the home, they're at the bedside, they're in the living room, it's kind of that death watch, you're just waiting for that time to come, and everybody knows it's coming, but they're not, they think they may be prepared, they may be ready, but they're really not, when that time comes. And so, I always tried to be there when the person passed, if it was possible, but definitely before they passed. If you're not there when they pass, if you learn that someone has passed away, then go as quickly as possible. That's the other side of that. If you can't go before, go as soon as possible. You don't have to stay long. You don't have to say a lot of things. You just, show up and show them that you care. Pray with them. Because people aren't going to remember a lot of the sermons that you preach, the Bible says that you teach, but they will remember you being there in their home right after dad passed away, or their husband passed away, or whatever it is. They will remember that you were there, took time to come. Listen a lot. Carl was just talking about listening. I always have my ears open during those times because while they're waiting for someone to pass away or someone that just passed away, they will talk about that person, right? And so they'll tell you things that you might want to use in the message or that you might use to base your message off of. And I would never, take notes while I was there or anything like that. But as soon as I got out to the car, if I had something to write down, I would write down notes. Or I would, when technology kind of increased, then I would take my phone and just record. They said this about so and so, and some details about a story that somebody shared with me or something like that, because invariably I could use that in that message. So go before they pass away, go as soon as they do pass away. If you haven't gone before, schedule a meeting with the family. Carl talked about that too. Even if you don't know the family, meeting with them just briefly for an hour or 30 minutes, then you can gain a lot of insight. But setting up time with the family, I always enjoyed that because and I would just tell them if I was there at the home after the person passed away, I'd say, hey, I'm going to call y'all tomorrow and let's see if we can set up a time, to get together and plan the service and get it done as quickly as possible. Because you're doing the regular ministry, you're spending time with your family, you've got responsibilities for bivocational, and you're working. When you plan the meeting, try to plan it for a time that's best for the family. Doesn't mean it's going to be best time for you, but where there's not a lot of rush, you don't have to rush to get through with things. And really the purpose of the meeting is to plan the funeral. But more than that, it's to allow them to talk, to process, to share those stories. And I would take notes. I always took notes when I was meeting with the family. I would write, furiously. I would have some questions to ask them just in case they couldn't come up with something or whatever, or to guide our conversation. But I would always come with those few questions that would help me. And I always started with, what can you tell me about your loved one, that will help me as I prepare for the service? And usually that one question, you don't ever have to ask another question again. Well, Dad loved to fish, and Dad loved to, be at the church or whatever it was, If they needed some prompting, I would always ask about hobbies or interests, whether they're in the military, their background, their family history, where they worked, their character. Well, tell me a little bit about your dad. And sometimes it's hard for families. They're in the midst of grief, especially if it was a sudden loss. And so they can't even think of answers to those really basic questions.
Has anybody ever said to you, this was a bad person? Was this person,
They've never said it in those words necessarily. There was always something good that they could say. Now, one of the very first funerals I ever did as a pastor, I'd never met the lady. I was very new I was newly, chosen pastor. In fact, I hadn't even officially started, but the person passed away and they asked me if I would come and do this service for her. And I was like, sure. And, I didn't really know this person at all. And so when I sat down with the family, I said, tell me a little bit about your mom. Well, she liked to crochet. And that was it. They didn't talk about, she was, she worked at Wynn's, 5 and dime for 30 years. I had a closet full of, material and, it was very thin. And she was, other people told me that, she was a mean lady. Other people told me she was a hard person. Always negative, not the family was telling me this, but other people were telling me this. And I'm like, what am I going to say about Willie Merle? That was her name, Willie Merle.
She's a happy, friendly lady.
She couldn't say that. No, couldn't say that. No, love to serve. No, none of that. And so I preached from John chapter 14. I used that passage. They said she was a Christian, so I just had to believe them because I didn't know. And that was a hard one. But no, I've never had anybody say it was a bad person. I've had police involved at a service You know, because the funeral home was pretty sure there was gonna be some kind of altercation over this person dying suddenly, and the family was at odds with one another and all this stuff. And he was kind of a questionable character, I will say that. But, you know, when I got up there, I said, hey, folks, you know, I know maybe there's some people here who have some hard feelings against one another, and, you know, everybody has some emotions going on. And I said, we're not here, you know, to discuss any of those things or to talk about, we're, you know, here to talk about Brad. His name was Brad. And I didn't know the family, never met the man, died in a motorcycle accident in Louisiana. And I met him, you know, on the Friday night before the visitation, and he showed up to do the service. And the, you know, funeral director was like, hey, I just want to tell you, you know, things could get kind of rough here, you know. The girlfriend's involved and families, you know, didn't want the girlfriend there and all that stuff. I just said, you know, we're not here for any, you know, any reason other than because you all, I didn't say we, you all loved Brad in some way. They had a relationship with him, you know. Things went pretty well till we got to the graveside. Anyway. Well, you know, the girlfriend wanted to play some song and drove her car up to the, you know, right up next to the casket to play the song off the radio on her car before cell phones that had music and all that stuff. Anyway, crazy stuff, but you know, sometimes this is an easy process working with families. Sometimes it's difficult.
Right.
But it's always or should always be helpful to you because as you're taking those notes, making mental notes, if somebody shares a memory, a story, you know, just jot those things down. And I always told the families, I said, hey, if you think of something that you didn't mention that you want me to say specifically, send me an email. Here's my phone number, text it to me, write it out. If you want me to say something and read it, I'll read it for you if you don't feel like you can. And so it's just always, you know, I always just trying to help them see that the funeral is not about the person necessarily. It's about the family and what you want, you know, this funeral to be like. And so I would just try to encourage them, comfort them, those kinds of things. And families always appreciate that kind of pastoral ministry, even if it's just 30 minutes before an hour before the visitation. They appreciate it. As soon as that family meeting is over, I would go process through my notes. Unless I knew the person really, really well. But most of the time, I would just go straight to my office, or if I was going home, I'd even go home and just type everything out and process through, and try to put it all together as a, you know, kind of a cohesive story, those kinds of things. When I would meet with the family, I would walk with them through the typical pattern of the service. Okay, you know, how many songs do y'all want? You know, is there any specific scripture you'd like to have read? Is there anyone else that you want to speak? I'd always ask that. Anybody else you want to speak or to say something? Because you know, sometimes family members wanted to say something. And I would just say, all right. And then they would kind of give me all that and I would put it together. I'm like, okay, looks like we're going to come in. I'm going to do a little welcome. I'll do, you know, then there's going to be a song and it'll be this song. And then we're going to read scripture, or I'll do the obituary, scripture prayer, another song, message, end with a song, you know, those kinds of things. And they, you know, you know, they've never planned a funeral. And so they're glad for you as the expert to say, this is kind of the way the funeral service typically, you know, goes along. Oh, okay, all right, well, yeah, that's fine. We want this song, that song, those kinds of things. You know, try to guide them in choosing the right songs. Yeah, that's always a challenge when you got people who are not necessarily Christians. You know, one of the biggest funerals I ever did was for a young man in our community, passed away suddenly, and a wonderful father, probably wasn't a Christian. But they wanted it at our church. They wanted me to do it. I didn't really have any connection with the family, but we had the biggest church in town. They wanted to have it at our church, and it was packed out, people standing around the walls in the back, you know, 500, 600 people, you know, and they were like, we want to play Every Rose Has Its Thorn. I'm like, Guns N' Roses. I'm like, well, let me review the lyrics, you know, and I kind of reviewed the lyrics. I'm like, all right, we're going to end with that.
Yeah.
We're going to end with that, you know. As people passing by the casket will play Every Rose.
I just heard one where older lady passed away. Prior before that, she had arranged a funeral and she had him singing Another One Bites the Dust.
No way.
I'm telling you, they were out. Another one bites the dust. And I'm like, that's what she wanted.
Okay.
So when I first started pastoring Moffett, it was the first month that I was there. And they told me there was gonna be a funeral at the church. And I think I knew who Randy was, and maybe I don't even know that I knew who you were.
I don't know either.
Yeah. And
Probably
so,
not.
yeah, that was probably the first time I met Randy.
Yeah.
And so they said, you know, this guy passed away, and I knew the guy because when I worked at Texas Hydraulics where he worked, I worked in the factory with him, so he wasn't my friend, but I knew who he was. He died of cancer. And his dad was a member of Randy's church in Holland,
But had been a member.
but had been a member at Moffett. And I don't know how it ended up at my church, but I'm a brand new pastor. And Randy comes to do that funeral and it was packed. There were standing room only. They were all standing at the back. People were standing outside. There must have been 250 people at that funeral.
Yeah, at least.
So he was probably in
50s,
50s,
early 50s.
early 50s. So, you know, that's an age that the old people know you, the young people know you, and they came out of the woodwork. And I stood up there looking at Randy and I was just praying for him. I was like, he don't even know this guy.
Nope, never
He's
met
not
him.
even in his own church, but Randy knocked it out of the ballpark. You know?
Yeah.
But that's really what I met. Randy was at a funeral at my church.
That's true. Yeah. That's so crazy. That was a lot of years ago.
It was 2011.
Yeah. So, you know, the funeral is important. And I always, just some guiding principles for the itself. I would say, be sure it promotes healing. You know, it's the start of the healing process in the hearts of the family. Dr. Frank Siegler, in his book, the Broadman's Minister Manual, which is an old book that they used to give us in seminary. But he said the primary purpose of the funeral service is to aid people in working through their grief in a normal fashion. The minister should not seek to stir the emotions, but should encourage grieving persons to express their emotions normally. So this idea of healing, you know, you're not there to whip everybody up into a frenzy, you know, make them, you know, more emotional than they already are. You're there to help kind of calm things and bring healing.
Can I share this Sunday?
Oh, yeah.
So, there's this real, I've learned working in the funeral home now that there's about a half a dozen songs that are sung at every stinking funeral.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so there's a fairly new song out and it says, I'm about to draw my last breath. I'm about to leave this earth. I'm standing on the mountain. And he says, don't you cry over my body. And so when I first went up to the pulpit to speak, I said, you know, the song said, don't cry over my body. And I said, that makes good poetry, but it's not real life.
That's right.
And I said, I know what you're going through is hard. There's emotions that are going on, and I want everyone here to know that it is okay to cry. And so, you know, I
Give him permission.
give him permission, and that, you know, there were some grandsons there trying to be real stoic.
Yeah.
And when I said that, I mean, one of them put his head down because he was just weeping. And sometimes I think they need to know that emotion is okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's a good
and
point.
The song is it's a great song, I guess.
Yeah.
But in real life, it
That's
ain't
not
like
true.
that. We're hurting. We're hurting.
There's a particular song I like, I will play with you, because music has a very deep connection to emotions, and you can get a crowd out of control real quick.
Real fast. That's right.
There's this song by Michael W. Smith, it's called Live Forever. It's, it will bring you to tears just to listen to the song. But it talks about one day we're gonna live forever together. We're gonna be with Jesus. And it's a kind of nice song. I played it in a funeral once for them to go with the band. So it was a sure waiting there, but it was more in a service of consolation. What happens is I worked at a funeral. I was a funeral director.
Oh, wow.
So then we had a service of consolation for all the people that
Yes.
passed away during the
Right,
year.
yeah.
we do that.
And I created a video,
Mhm.
so with all the faces and the
Right.
dates of everybody there, and I played that song with a
Oh,
video.
wow.
So for sure, it was very, very emotional, but it was supposed to promote healing to people
Right.
in the right context.
Well, yeah, it wasn't in the midst of a funeral. It
Yeah.
was a memorial.
Yeah, but I've seen songs that as soon as the music starts, you
Yeah.
lose control over the crowd. And it's the worst thing that can happen, whether you're a pastor or a funeral director.
What do you mean by losing control over the crowd?
You have a
Rowdy?
mass hysteria with the crowd because they go absolutely crazy. They want to throw themselves in the grave.
Oh,
Which is cultural too.
Mhm.
Every culture has their different
Yeah.
expressions. Some cultures, if you don't do that,
Mhm.
then you didn't really love the person.
Right, you
Yeah.
don't scream and
Yeah.
act out.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, what he's talking about is, this happened in my own family. My uncle, he was an alcoholic that's
Carl's seen it all.
And you can probably relate to it. I don't know if you guys can, because it's a cultural thing, but my uncle would watch Jimmy Swaggart on TV.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
cuss and drink and smoke and
Yeah.
party, and it was one of those kind of
Yeah,
things.
Jerry Lee Lewis.
And my mom hated him.
Hmm.
And when he died at 48, he was trying to beat up his wife and he had a heart attack in the process, so it was rough.
Yeah.
And at his funeral,
He
he
was a
had
hell
the
of a man.
song. Oh, they'll all come out and see me,
Oh, no.
the green grass of home.
Yes.
Lips of
That's what
cherry.
it's called, the green grass.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and when that song started playing on that radio, my mom lost it it was a graveside service. Cause he wasn't embalmed or anything, it was dead, viewing, burial, all in one whack. And as soon as that song started playing, oh, they'll all come out and see me. Well, my mom didn't want to be there anyway, and she lost it. I mean, the biblical expression wailing and moaning, that's what, I mean, it was bad. Trying to calm her down and they couldn't.
Music.
With Hispanics, they feel very deeply.
Sure.
And they're probably the worst funerals I have ever been to is when you have 400, 500 people.
Yeah.
They play those rancheras or those things at the end of the service.
Real emotional.
And then you have people like rushing to throw themselves when the casket lowers.
Oh, man.
I found because of liabilities, you can't really touch people when they're nearby, is to use their own family as protection. So sometimes I had to make human chains around the gravesite so that they will catch their own loved ones and make sure that they don't throw themselves in there.
Wow.
All kinds of stuff.
Interesting. Well, yeah, so the emotions come but you're right, music is a big one.
Just Hazel.
We need the police, the sheriff and everything.
We're just pointing towards, it's fine.
Or cattle park, it'd be better to just reload it.
Oh, gosh.
Funny.
Well, people are emotional at funerals, at memorial services, at gravesides. So sometimes it's strong emotion of loss. It really is authentic. Sometimes it's a regret, because they didn't have a great relationship with the person, so they're mourning the death of the opportunity to make that right. Sometimes it's anger, they're angry at God, especially if it's a young person or someone who dies in kind of a senseless, auto accident or something like that, and no fault of their own. So that's why I say provide an opportunity, encourage healing in your funeral message and the way that you put things together. Offer hope. A funeral service gives a natural opening for a minister to proclaim the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. Whether the person is a Christian or not, you can still proclaim that we have hope in Jesus Christ. I've done lots of graveside services for people in our community. They never darkened the door of a church, and so I might always, I might talk about that person a little bit. I might talk about, the hope that, but I always end with the hope that we have in Jesus Christ, you know. Funeral services for people that you know, people who were members of your congregation, who are faithful followers of Jesus Christ. Those are easy. I mean, you know, they are just a cakewalk because you know them and you know that they are committed believers, and you can talk about them for hours. It's these other folks who, you know, maybe not so much, and so this is the opportunity you have to kind of plant some seeds to say we do have hope in Jesus Christ. And then really just bring honor. So, you know, provide healing opportunity, offer hope, but bring honor. And that's honor the deceased person, affirm them, you know, the high value of a life. Everyone, no matter who they are, what they've done, deserves the dignity afforded by a proper funeral and the burial or memorial service. For the message itself, some guiding principles, be brief. No one wants a long funeral message. It's uncalled for, I think, on every level. The family's already exhausted, probably mentally, physically. They don't need a 30-minute message.
About an hour and a half, so question here.
Definitely. You know, even if it's about the glories of heaven spoken in the tongues of men and angels, they don't want to hear it, you know. So I try to plan 10 minutes for my actual message. Now that doesn't include the obituary. That's separate. But 10 minutes for the actual message. Now I think the sermon that I preached for my dad's memorial service about 5 years ago probably went about 20, you know, about 20 minutes. But it was a memorial service. That's different than a funeral. Because you don't have a body there, you're not going to the graveside, you know, those kinds of things. So, and then it was my dad, and I was in charge, I could do it. You know?
Right.
And so I had lots to say, you know, about that. You don't want to rush through the message, but you don't want to drag it out either. So be sensitive. Try to think about, hey, if I'm in that person's position, what would I want?
Was
So-
your dad a God-fearing man?
Oh yes, yeah, definitely, yeah. So
Amen.
easy to preach his service, you know. So be brief, be biblical. You know, you think, well, the pastor, you shouldn't have to encourage pastors to be biblical, but you do. Basing the funeral sermon on the Bible is something I shouldn't have to say, but I've heard lots of funeral messages where it was just about the deceased, and it was just about how good a person they were, or whatever it was, but really never talked about the Bible. I like to focus on scripture, and if I'm able, I'll make a reference to the deceased within the message, but I let the scripture text be the focus. And one way that I kind of do that is that I take the obituary, and oftentimes I want to be the one to do the obituary. You know, sometimes if there's two pastors involved, well, you can do the obituary and scripture and prayer, but a lot of times, I mean, I did it when I was young in the ministry, didn't know what else to do, had only seen this type of thing done. You know, they give you a little record, a little card called the clergy record, and it's just the facts, and you just stand up there, or it's on the back of the little program that everybody's read through 15 times waiting for the service to start, and you just read it again. And I don't like that. And so a number of years ago, I started, this is where I would bring in what the family told me, and I would try to craft a story about the person as their obituary. Yeah, I would incorporate all the facts, who they were survived by, who predeceased them, those kinds of things. But I would say, you know, so those clergy records, where do they start? So-and-so died on May the 5th, 2022 at 9:50 at Scott and White Hospital, whatever. No, that's not where your story begins. It begins with birth. So I always, you know, okay, this person was born on January 5th, 1945, you know, whatever it is. And then I would just try to incorporate those stories, about their character, about the hobbies that they had, about their background, about their work, try to make it a full story so that when I get to my message, I might take some things, well, you know, so-and-so was a God-fearing man, and, you know, those kinds of things. I might add that to my message, but the message itself is just focused in on the Bible. So be biblical, and we'll talk in a minute about one specific way that I do that. Be personal. So be as personal as possible. You don't want to spend the entire time talking about the person. We've already mentioned that. But don't just be very general and talk generalities. And even if you don't know the deceased at all, try to be as personal as you can. Give information that you gain from that 30-minute meeting with him, that hour meeting with him, whatever it is. And, you know, take that obituary, try to, you know, build a little story out of it. Probably the easiest way that I found to write a funeral message and for it to be biblical is to find a biblical character. And this is easiest if you know the person. Find a biblical character that represents the life of the deceased person. So I learned this very early on in my life and in my ministry while I was still in college. Came from a personal experience. I have an uncle who for many, many years was pastor of a large, independent, fundamental, Bible-believing, King James Version only church in Midland, Texas. And he preached the funeral for one of my great-grandmothers in probably about 1991. And for his message that day, he took the biblical story from Acts of the lady named Dorcas, or she had another name, I can't remember what her other name was, but anyway, she was a widow in the book of Acts. This reference there, and it talked about, you know, she died, and they called Peter to come, and he brought her back to life. Was it Peter or Paul? I don't know. I'm not really Peter. I think it was Peter. You know, they had her up in the upper room. He went up there, and they showed all the good things that she had done, all the clothes that she had made and things, and said, you know, she was a wonderful woman. He dismissed everybody, and he brought her back to life. So that's the story that my uncle used that day, and he said, you know, my great grandmother, you know, and it really was. She was just like that, always helping other people, always serving in her church, always, you know, everybody thought so highly of her in the community, and I thought, wow, that's my great grandmother, you know. And so I've taken that as my model. I've never forgotten his sermon that day. Never forgotten that who he used as, of course, I love my great grandmother very much and very close to her, but I can still picture it at the Methodist Church in Lovington, New Mexico, and him up there preaching about that message. And so
Her Hebrew name was Tabitha.
Tabitha, there we go. Tabitha and Dorcas. They're same person, just different Greek and Hebrew names. So I often do this. You know, if I know the person real well, I'll think about, okay, who in the Bible, you know, kind of, and so I'll take their life and the biblical character's life and this person's life and try to weave those two together. Now you have to be careful about this. I once preached a funeral message for a 44-year-old man in my church out in West Texas, and I chose Noah as the character in the Bible because he was, you know, a lot of Noah's life was similar to this man. And so, you know, this man, the deceased man, was a farmer. And we know that Noah was a tiller of the soil, right? So, all right. Noah, farmer, deceased man, a farmer, kind of talked about that. Like Noah, I said the deceased man loved, provided for, and protected his family, just like Noah did. He loved his family. Like Noah, the deceased man was not perfect. And the reason I said that was because I knew that people in the audience would be like, okay, well, we know Noah. And we know this weird story that happened at the end of his life with his sons and him being naked and being drunk and all that. How's he going to handle that? Because Mac, you know, that didn't happen to Mac. And I just said, like Noah, Mac was not perfect. I didn't go into any details, but I said Noah made some mistakes in his life. And I talked about how the deceased man was not perfect, but that because of Jesus Christ, he was redeemed and he was forgiven. And it gave me a chance to talk about the transformation from a believer to a follower that I saw in that particular man in the last 3 years of his life. You know, it's a beautiful story. They were good friends of ours, and how he came from just being an occasional attender at church with his family to really a committed follower who, one time we were going on a mission trip down to the border and into Mexico for a children's home. We were taking, his family was going, but he was not. He was a truck driver. And he said, you know, he couldn't get away. It was at Christmas, and I don't know, things were just not going well, and they needed his help to get their truck. They were taking their vehicle, and something about it was not right. He's like, you know what? Y'all just wait right here. I'm gonna run down to the house, get my stuff. I'm just gonna go with And from that moment, that was the moment.
Mm.
He never looked back, was a dedicated follower of Christ and passionate about missions. And, so I got to share all of that story and I used Noah, and his brother-in-law came up to me afterwards. He's like, I'm glad you said that about Noah not being perfect. He said, because I had in mind, how in the world is he gonna say, he's gonna skip over that? He can't skip over that. But always,
That's
yeah.
something good to say though. We're not perfect.
right,
None of us are.
no, and that leads right to the gospel.
Exactly.
And I
By
could say
His grace.
Mac was not perfect, and he wasn't, he wasn't. He was a great man, wonderful family man, but he was not perfect. And it was but because of Christ, he made a difference in his life. So I always end with the gospel, always move them to the gospel. And you can do that in a variety of ways. You don't have to actually share the gospel, Romans Road or anything like that, but just always point them to the fact that Jesus Christ can make a difference. What you said at your father's service, how did you?
The passage that I used, my dad was an avid fisherman.
Okay.
So I used the story of when they made the large catch. I titled that sermon, "The Day the Great Fisher," or the day, anyway, the fisherman met the greatest fisherman,
Oh,
or
okay.
something like that. And so when Peter realized who Jesus was because of the big catch, when he fell at his feet.
Yeah.
And I said, that's the moment on a fishing trip when Peter realized that he was standing before the Son of God.
Hmm.
And I said, we will all meet this fate and stand before the Son of God, realizing who he really is. I mean, I laid the gospel. It was my dad's funeral, like
Right.
I said.
Yeah.
And that was a memorial. There was no body.
Right.
He was cremated.
Right.
And I probably went 30 minutes, wouldn't you say? Probably about 30 minutes, but like you said.
He said it felt like an hour, but it's just.
Yeah, and then I offered those New Testaments.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you said that.
I had about 50 Gideon's New Testaments.
There was a couple of them taken.
And yeah, there were a few taken. I don't even know who took them, but one point that I wanted to make about the obituary, I've learned two things, one on my own and one because now that I've been working for the funeral home. This is something I do, when they give me that clergy record, if I do read the part about that they died, I don't say they died. And if they died at such and such funeral home, I just don't like that.
I don't do that either.
If somebody's gonna read it, then I will give them my typed version.
Oh, really?
That said passed from
From
this life.
Yeah.
And if I don't know they were a Christian, I put into eternity. If they were a Christian and I know that, then I put to their eternal home in glory. And that's just something that I do because so-and-so died sounds so terrible. And then what I've learned also is I have listened to over the past 3 months now, Catholics doing it, a person from the Methodist Church, Baptist, it's all across the board, but they will read it and say, visitation is.
Yes.
I'm like, that
Stop.
was yesterday.
Stop reading at that point.
That was
It's
yesterday.
over. It's over. Don't do that. Or they'll go on to say, and services will be held at the chapel of Harvard, and you're there.
And you're there.
It's like, don't read that part.
Yeah, that, I have listened to that happen.
Yeah.
At least a half a dozen times over the past 3 months.
Yeah.
And that's terrible.
I sat through that, and when people other than me do it. I'm
Right.
like,
So I rewrite it.
that's good. Then you gave it to them to read.
Yes, I cut and paste it and then I take out what needs to be there. Now, I don't change any facts.
No, I understand. I
Yeah.
understand.
But I don't use the word died. And if you can, I'm like you, start with their birth.
Well, and I prefer to do the obituary myself, but
Yeah.
that's a good
Right.
practice, just to go ahead and write it out, whatever, however you want it to kind of sound, if someone else is gonna read
I
it.
did the same thing that you were talking about. The woman was an Astros fan.
Oh,
And as I was reading, it said, and she was a big Astros fan, and I stopped right there. They had a lap blanket over her
oh, really?
that was the
Astros.
Astros blanket. And I said, when I came in earlier today to pay my respects, I looked down and went, Astros? You know, so the family kind of laughed, and
Yeah.
I incorporated that into the obituary.
Yes.
So the obituary is dry,
Oh, yeah, it's
It's-
just facts,
and they've already read it.
15 times.
So I do the same thing you do. I try to incorporate some of the person's life. I said in a world of football fans, we've got a baseball fan, you know, and an Astros fan. It kind of eases things.
Yeah, this opens.
But I can't stand that thing. So and so died at such and such funeral home, and I'm like, did you just read that?
I think the part of mentioning that the person died is something that I believe in my experience, it supersedes as far as being worse. Is the temptation that the preacher or the pastor has to try to preach at the people because he knows that this person that is in the casket is in hell.
Yeah.
And it's one of the hardest things because you know that you want to tell the people about the love of God, but how do you tell them without offending them, telling them this guy didn't make it? And one of the best a wild card sermon that I picked up from a Baptist preacher that went by the funeral home once. He spoke about he did a whole drama, and as he was speaking about this person that was a baseball player, and he was at the bat, and it was his turn to swing. So then he hits the ball and he runs through first, second, third base, and he wants to run to home. And at the moment that he does, they catch the ball and they send it right into base. So he goes over the dirt and he, you know, the typical thing, he touches the base, but at the same time the ball gets there. The whole stadium, they're just watching, and all they can see is just the curtain of dust. And he said, this is what we're looking at right now. It's a
We don't
huge
know whether
curtain of
he's
dust
safe or
because
not.
only the umpire has to say so, whether he made it or not. And this was a great introduction of who God is to the people. And then that rather, it focuses on the hope of them knowing God rather than focusing on the reality of where this guy's not. You know, so it's one of the best wild card sermons that I was able to get and help out people at the moment that they were in such need.
Right. One of the best that I heard was Gary DeSalvo over at Temple Bible. He was the pastor at Temple Bible for years and years. He's passed away now too from cancer. But he did a service for a young lady in our community right after we moved there. She was young, had kids our age and the same grades as some of our kids, and so we knew it well. Eventually we lived right behind them, but the mother passed away from cancer in her late 30s, early 40s, very young, and you know, standing room only kind of crowd, and it's huge, and the Temple Bible was full, and people standing, well-known people, and he said, and I don't know if she was a Christian or not, really. They did attend there on occasion. And he said something like that, you know, they did when they attended, he'd say, so when they attended, she sat right over here, you know, that kind of thing. But he told the story about, you know, he's like, one day Jesus told the story about a great banquet that's going to happen. And, you know, and all of us are invited. Everyone's invited to this great banquet, but we all have a choice of whether we attend or not. And he said, you know, it's up to you. He didn't say whether she had chosen or not, but I was like, "Oh, that is good," you know. And so I've used that a lot at the end of the
Right, and I use the phrase. I did this with my dad. Tom and I both have talked about this. You should never preach someone into heaven. If you don't know that they were a Christian or
Correct.
their family hasn't said it,
That's
don't
right.
preach them into
You
heaven.
can't say it.
But at the same time, don't preach them into hell either. And so what I usually will say, if I honestly don't know, I will say that they have passed from this life into eternity and their fate is in the hands of our God. But the question is, you who remain, you will meet the same fate. And then you point to Jesus from there.
Yes.
But when you say their fate is in the hands of God, you aren't pointing in any direction. All you're doing is putting it in God's judgment.
Yes.
And so even on my dad, I said, my dad's fate is in God's hands. And, you know, he will determine that. But he's gone. And you're here that remains. And so then I led that into that message about the fisherman. But you know, that is the greatest thing that was told to me in the very beginning was don't ever preach anyone into heaven, but don't preach them into hell either.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I wouldn't want to hear that.
No, but I've heard it. I've heard people, pastors, said this guy, let hell wild.
Really?
That kind of thing.
I've seen people on the graveside, old school preachers were bringing their PA system and screaming and they're inviting people into hell.
Sure.
It's,
That's not good. It's not good. And, couple of things, just special considerations I always like to talk about is the use of videos in the service, people always want to have the picture videos, a lot of times the funeral homes will make them for them now. But when, I always tell the family when I'm meeting with them especially, if they want to have one, I encourage them, choose maybe 1 or 2 songs at the most, and then enough pictures to fill that. Let's play it before the service starts. A lot of times they want it during the service. I really discourage that. But the service that Carl was talking about that I did out at First Baptist Church Moffett, for this young man, they said, hey, we're going to put this video together ourselves. We want it played in the middle of the service before you get up to preach. I'm like, that's fine. I said, I think it'd be best before. Now we want it eventually. Okay. I'm pretty sure that we saw every picture of that young man from birth to death. Most songs are, 4 minutes approximately, and I know that there were 4 or 5 songs played. So the video is 20 minutes long for this young man.
My wife was pretty long, but we played it before
That's fine.
and we kept it going, but we turned the sound off.
Right.
Just so, whatever, but.
Right. And I always tell them, let's do it beforehand. Let's do it, as soon as service is over, we'll start that video again, but this family wanted it during the service. And man, I sat up there and was like, okay, this is gonna be the last one. This is gonna be the last one. Nope. So next song starts.
it's a horrible feeling.
So, so the service had already been going for 30, 45 minutes before I even got up to preach. So, and there's people, like Carl said, they're all standing around the wall. They are tired of standing there.
When you're gonna bury him, let's go.
Yeah. And so I had, pressure on me to have a biblically based message, but here we've been here already 30 minutes. I was talking about that sort of bride,
Right.
long video in the middle of it. And so after that, I would tell people, it's fine if you want to do one in the service, but let's do it 5 to 7 minutes maximum,
Nowadays you give a QR code and they go on and watch it on
Yeah, well, that's true.
later on.
The other thing is just the sharing of memories. I call it open life night, that we want, this is more common in a memorial service, but I've had families say, well, we want people to have an opportunity to say something if they want to say. And I'm like, I always tell them, I'm like, that's fine. We can do this. But I want you to know, I'm not going to linger long. I'm going to say, family wants you to have an opportunity if you'd like to share a story or say something a brief story. I always say that, or a memory of their loved one. Then this is your opportunity to do that. And I said, I might offer twice, but if no one stands up immediately, I'm moving on. I said, because, and most people don't want to get up there. They don't want to be in front of anybody.
Yeah.
They want to say something, but they don't want to do it in public, those kinds of things. But I will say to the family oftentimes, let's do that if we're going to the graveside. Let's do that at the graveside. Because if everybody's standing around, you're not going to speak as long. Because no one's sitting and waiting. So again, some families are just adamant about it. I say, let's not even do it. And other families are like, no, we don't want to do that. Because, it makes the family feel bad if no one stands up to say anything. Didn't they like that? Or didn't they want, surprise? Someone didn't say something about it. What's that?
Remember that feeling?
Yeah. So I always just say, let's not do that. All right, well, let's take a break. I know we need one. We'll come up and wrap up funerals real quick and go on to weddings.
Go ahead.
I was just looking at this one.
We're gonna look at a couple of practical applications, this, some case studies here in just a second, but, Tom Rayner, who used to be the president of Lifeway, he retired several years back. He wrote a little blog post about, funerals, one time, and he had included this. He says, the case of the devious undertakers. So maybe Carl, he just left. He might need to pull this on somebody, but he writes, this is a true story from him, from his pastoral experience. He says, it was my first funeral as a pastor. I was understandably nervous, so I arrived at the funeral home early. I explained to the funeral directors my situation, and they assured me that they would explain every step of conducting the funeral. I was grateful for my new friends. By the way, one of the funeral directors asked, are you familiar with the custom at funerals in this community? I wasn't, but I listened eagerly to their explanation. And when I concluded my message, they told me that I am to face the open casket behind me, lean over, and kiss the deceased. The thought of kissing a dead person did not appeal to me. I did not want to mess up the funeral and disappoint the family. So immediately after I concluded my message, I obediently made a turn and kissed the deceased on the cheek. I turned around to see a confused, if not horrified, family. And far in the back of the room, I saw 3 funeral directors laughing uncontrollably.
It's so messed up.
That's so awesome. That's a true story. Yeah, it's a true story.
The kids supported more than I.
Oh my gosh, yeah. No,
Listen,
Oh,
that hasn't happened to me, but I worked in a hospital, phlebotomist,
okay.
medical tech, and in the hospital, when a patient passes away, they put a picture on the door of a dove.
Oh, really?
So I did not know this.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
Oh,
So the day before, the week I had drawn this man, I had drawn this patient, and like nothing.
yeah, so,
And I was going in for my morning routine,
oh, no.
and
Oh,
I don't
no.
eat, and the family is all, and I'm like, okay, the scenes seem kind of weird, but I still was like, my thing. And so I was like, hi, and they were like, hi. And so I was like, let's draw his blood. And I looked at them again, and they were like, in my head, like something's not right.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. And he was really wrapped up, really tight. So
Why is it so stiff?
right, I went to lean over to talk to him, and I was like, and I just stood and I looked over to the lady, and I'm like, he passed away. She was like, yes. I was like, oh, I was like, I am so sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know why they did not remove this blood work out of the way. I am so sorry. I am sorry for your loss. And she was like, it's okay. But their face was like,
Now you gotta put this blood back again. And it's over there. Now, let me tell you.
That is how it works.
I went to the person, like, why did you guys not remove this freaking blood? And they were like, oh, we forgot. You know, because you were like, you got to.
You knew that we didn't know.
So that was embarrassing. We tried, I was trying it, but I read it.
So there's gonna be some stories in Uganda. There's gonna be some stories in Uganda.
Yeah,
But that was just horrifying.
that's horrifying.
Yes, it was.
we need to send that one to Tom Reno.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Well, some case studies, just, for practical consideration, I guess, we won't go through all of them, but, just for you to think about. Look at case study number 2. You're asked to perform the memorial service for a community member, the owner of a local bank. He's a pillar in the community, has a beautiful family. His wife is a member of your church, though she rarely attends. It's public knowledge that the deceased is a transvestite and practicing homosexual. What is your response and how do you prepare a message for this memorial?
We just got
Well,
one
what
on
do
David.
you do it?
wasn't perfect.
Do it. Why not? Okay,
We gotta do it.
all right. She's a member of your church. Not, I mean, not the deceased, but his wife.
You just, I mean. The important thing is that you just show that God still loved him. Up,
Right.
You know, and that we should. Yeah, that's about as far as I can go.
Yeah.
You know what?
I mean, I think that, you know, God loves us all.
I mean, it would take a little more thought to
Right.
put something together, but, I mean, first off, you know, he lived a life, he was here.
Right, I
Yeah.
definitely wouldn't be able to say he went to heaven or something
you know
like
what?
that.
We can't judge nobody.
It's up.
We don't know
it's
what the
God's
last seconds in the heart is. We don't.
Goes back to Pastor Carl's, his
His
fate is in God's hands.
Uh-huh,
I mean, I would do the service.
right,
I would do the service.
I would too.
You know, would you mention that part of his life?
I wouldn't,
Probably not.
no.
Well,
I mean, you know, I wouldn't.
If it's,
You know.
if it's public knowledge, I mean, why do you need to?
Right,
mention it?
Right.
you wouldn't need to say,
You wouldn't say,
And if it's not public knowledge, then why say it at all?
right, right.
right,
So either way, it's,
Yeah, I mean, I think, and then again, it's opportunity to share the gospel, you know, God loves,
exactly.
right.
you know, each person, no matter, you know, perfect, imperfect, you know, those kinds of things, This is
That would
one,
be
it would be hard.
that would be a hard one, yeah.
It'd be a hard one. Another hard one, in case it's statement number 4, you must conduct the service for a young teenage boy who committed suicide. Teenager and his family are members of your church, so they didn't attend often. Everyone in the community knows the circumstances surrounding his death. The family has asked that you not mention it during the service. So what is your reaction? How do you prepare for this service? I've never had to do a service for someone who committed suicide.
Well, I mean, suicide is not.
It's not uncommon.
It's not an end all sin.
No, it's not.
So, I mean, we don't know, and just like the other one we just talked about, you know, God loved them
Right.
and it's up to God to, you know, cause we don't know what was in these people's hearts and what they had, you know.
I think the hard part of this one is not saying anything about it.
That's where I think.
Because, you know, you would want to say, or I would want to say, you know, he lost hope. You
Right.
know, for some reason.
Right.
You know, he lost hope. But, you know, we do have hope in Jesus Christ, you know, so I don't know how you
Right.
would get to that point. You'd have to get to that point, but if the family has actually not mentioned it,
You just preach hope around it.
yeah, you'd have to. It'd be, again, another big challenge to not mention it because everybody knows about it. But at the same time, everybody already knows, so do you have to?
When I sat down with that family this past week, I said the same thing that I say to all of them, that I'm not. If they were committed member Christian in my church, right, a family, that's a different story. But like this one, I told them, I said, I have 2 objectives as the minister of this service. The first one is to comfort a family who's hurting right now, and the second one is to lift up the name of Jesus. So from the very start, they know,
You know.
that my heart goes out to them, but at the same time, I'm a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I'm gonna lift the name of Jesus. So if I had somebody say, we don't want that Jesus stuff, we don't.
Right, I was just gonna ask you that.
Right, I would say, then I'm probably not your guy.
Okay,
I mean, that, I'm just gonna be straightforward. I had a guy do that about the wedding. Remember I shared with you about the wedding?
Yeah.
And I said, then why did you get a preacher? If you don't want Jesus in your wedding, then why did you get a preacher?
right.
So,
Have you ever had, you haven't ever had anybody do that at a funeral, have you?
no,
Yeah.
no, I've
Yeah,
never.
most of the time they want
Right,
something.
only at a wedding, and he changed his mind when his
Right.
wife said, wait a minute, I want God in my wedding. And I just said, you two need to talk, and I'll be waiting in my car.
Yeah,
Because if they would have said, you don't want God, I'd have been right on down the road. But
Well, and I think you have
that
the,
you stand up for that.
yeah, you have the right to say.
Right.
Then it's, you'll need to find someone.
And I think that's the case scenario he's trying to show is the families kind of dictate. If you're leading, you're leading.
Yes.
And
And you might want to address it with the family and say, well, I need, I need to say something about it to offer hope to others who may be struggling as well. You might can go at it that way.
I mean, but if they don't want Jesus spoken of.
Well, I'm talking about just
this
suicide.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, with Jesus, I'm with Carl.
Right.
If they don't want that, then you don't
They
need
can
to,
just bury them.
you don't need, yeah,
Why just throw them in the ground then?
the family can take care of it.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, there's a lot of people now that, do that and they don't believe in God, so.
right, well, they don't want a pastor anymore, the family takes care of it, We still live in a place where most of the time they still want one, but in other parts
Well,
of the
cause they know
United
about
States,
50% of them probably have some kind of relationship, but not,
Right.
they're acquainted with the church in some way.
Right,
And they feel the need at that point
right.
for a pastor. So those are just some things to consider, some of them from personal experience, some not. So let's switch on over to weddings, funerals. Difficult. Weddings are difficult too, just in a different way. These are from Tom Rayner also. He asked for funny wedding stories from pastors. And he put together 15 in his list, but I just took my favorite top 10. So these are actual stories from pastors. Funny wedding stories. Number one, during the wedding vows, the bride said no. Number two, the uncle of the bride sent a request in since he could not attend. He asked someone to read 1 John 4:18, which says, "There is no fear in love. Instead, perfect love drives out fear." Unfortunately, the reader quoted John 4:18 at the wedding, which says, "For you have had 5 husbands, and the man you never had." Whoa, that's close. Close.
Is the Lord talking to Samaritan?
Yeah, that's right. Number 3, the bride fainted during the wedding 4 times.
Oh, my.
Number 4, the pastor did an outdoor wedding with several people in attendance who were not wearing shirts. The pastor did not specify the gender of those people. The bride, he said, had a cigarette the entire service.
Oh my God.
Number 5, guy in the sound booth started the wrong music during a wedding. Everyone got to hear "The Lady is a Tramp." I'm not even sure how they got that one confused with anything. Number 6, a couple requested the pastor to do a beach wedding. But first, they wanted to see his bare feet to make sure they would look acceptable for the wedding.
Oh,
Oh my God.
No. Number 7, the groom's ex-wife stood in the back of the sanctuary yelling, "Not," as the pastor read 1 Corinthians 13, "Love is patient, not love is kind, not." What do you do with that? You just keep going. Number 8, pastor was officiating a wedding on the bay, and a man comes up in a paddle boat and says, "Don't do it." And the bride responds by yelling expletives at him. Number 9, the pastor was asked to officiate a wedding by talking through an animatronic deer head. I'm not even sure how that's possible. Hopefully he said no. Number 10, during the wedding service, a guest phone loudly declared, "You have reached your destiny." Tom Rainier, also in one of his podcast episodes a few years back, discussed 6 surprising time drainers of church leaders. Number 5 on his list was weddings. Weddings are a time drainer. They are exhausting. Because you have rehearsal, you have a lot of times rehearsal dinner, you have a wedding, you have a reception. Again, they're on the weekends, so you have to sacrifice family time to do these weddings. As far as a wedding is concerned, a lot of times comparing funerals and weddings, in the funeral, you are the one in charge, as the pastor, you're the one in charge, you kind of dictate things. Of course, working with a funeral home, they're in charge of kind of getting everything started, but then you're, you take the lead after that. At a wedding, you're not in charge. You can be in charge to some extent, but at the wedding, you're at the mercy of the bride, the bride's mother, the wedding coordinator, the bride's best friend, or whoever the bride believes should be in charge of the wedding. And it can be a nightmare. I've not had really difficult experiences, but there are some. It's definitely tense sometimes as to who's in charge. I always say plan the wedding with the couple in advance.
Yes.
Walk through everything with them. I do beforehand. Get them what music you're gonna choose, who's gonna sing it, or who's gonna play it, who's gonna run the sound, who's gonna usher mom and grandma. Will step parents be seated together? Walk through every detail of the wedding, put the program together, and then I always have the bride and groom look over that, or especially the bride, and say, "Is this what you want?" And she says, "Yes, that's the way I want." And I say, "Well, this is what we're going to use when it comes time to rehearsal. This is the outline that I'm going to use, and we're going to follow it." And I would make them put down, the grandparents' names, who's going to usher them, who's going to usher the groom's mother, all of that kind of stuff, so that I would know who's doing what at what time. Because if there wasn't a wedding coordinator, I would take on that role. All right, it's your turn. Okay, you're in line here. Because if you don't, it's just
It is.
big mess.
Wow,
Um,
you know so much about it.
oh yeah, so
It is a
much.
night.
I just thought you would go up there and read, you get
Oh,
married and that's it.
no. Now, I always encourage them to have a rehearsal of some sort, whether it's 30 minutes before the thing's supposed to start, an hour before it's supposed to start, the day before. And I say, I'm in charge of the rehearsal. I'm in charge of the rehearsal, and so I will so about when everybody's there, I'll say, all right, together I want all the wedding party, the bride, the groom, the bridesmaids, the groomsmen, parents, whoever's going to be a part of the wedding party. You all come up here, everybody else, because there's always a lot of extra people decorating or doing whatever. And I would just say, all right, I introduce myself, I'm the pastor, and I'm going to be doing the wedding tomorrow. And I would talk to them about how important weddings are, what it really means. That we're in the sight of God. This is important, and it's a solemn occasion, but it's, also an exciting time. I talk to them about plenty of things that could happen. I would even tell them, okay, who's the best man? Who's the bridesmaid? I'm like, you're going to have the ring. When I call for the ring, you're going to take that ring and you're going to put it in the palm of your hand like this, and you're going to hold it out to me, and I'm going to take it from you. You don't try to give it to me. I'm going to take it from you, and then I will hand it to the bride. I'll hand it to the groom. I'd be very specific.
Yeah.
And then I would say, if it falls on the ground, you pick it up. No one else. I don't want, the groom reaching down and banging his head with, whoever, and, all that stuff. I'm like, and I said, if it's something funny happens, we might laugh a little bit, and then we're going to come right back to, this is an important, solemn occasion, before God. I literally walk through everything with them. And be in charge of that.
When you marry somebody, do you give them marriage counseling prior?
Well, that's a good segue, because one of the things that I do, or that I did, was, it's in your packet there, the last part of it, is my wedding policy.
You give this to the people that are gonna marry, like a little package?
That's
amazing.
I do.
What's the letter?
No, that's Tom Regere's letter, and we'll talk about that in a second, but mine says wedding policy at the top. This is my wedding policy. And I developed this because really, it's a way for me to be able to say no. And so I write at the top, I do not perform marriage ceremonies without premarital counseling having been completed. Now, that doesn't mean that I have to do it, but it does mean it has to be done. My son just got engaged last night. This is going to be his second marriage. And he called me a few days ago and he said, Dad, we want to know, before we, start making plans for the wedding. Do you want to just attend, or do you want to be the pastor? And before I could even say anything, he said, I've already told, Samantha, that, he's probably gonna require that we do premarital counseling. And I said, you got it? He knows, he knew, because I didn't do his first wedding, because he didn't want to do premarital counseling. And I said, so.
And it didn't last.
And it did not. It did not last. And so I said, yep, that's right. If you want me to do the wedding, I will be more than happy to do it. But I won't do it unless you have premarital counseling. Now, we haven't talked about whether I will do that with them or not, but I probably will. Cool.
Question about that. So if somebody else is gonna do you ask them to like sign something saying or talk to the minister that gave them the premarital counseling?
So I did this I did my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's wedding, years ago. And I told them I'll be glad to do it, because they called and asked me, and I said, but you have to go to premarital counseling. And I found a minister there they live in the DC area, and I found a minister at a Baptist church, and I called him first and said, would you be willing to do this? Is my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, would you be willing to do premarital counseling with them? And they loved it, and it was a great experience. They're nominal Christians, if at all. She's probably not at all. But it was very helpful for them.
Right, yeah.
And they had to pay for it. They had to pay him. And I talked to him afterwards. Everything, did they finish, did you, all your requirements? Yeah. So.
In Puerto Rico, when my wife and me got married 46 years ago, you had to take marriage counseling before you got married.
There was a law.
By the
There was a
government.
law. Yeah.
Oh,
And let
really?
me tell you, they don't do it no more. I would think they should have kept it up. It helped me. It's helped us.
Sure.
It made me understand what I was getting into, what she was getting into.
Right.
And because of the things they said there, we have been able to stay together.
Right.
Of course, she's helped a lot.
Well, and even in Texas, there is a law that, now they encourage premarital counseling, and I think if you go through it, it's either a reduced price.
The state of
marriage
Texas
license.
Yes.
offers, it's called,
Tech-
two together in Texas.
Yeah.
And you get a discount. I don't know what it is anymore,
That is
but it used to be that at the end you would get it would cost you like $10 to get married, and you waive the 24-hour waiting period, and you go straight to
Yeah.
the JP if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so there were some benefits of going
Yeah.
to an approved, it had to be approved,
And most,
by the state of Texas.
but it's done through churches.
Especially when you're young. I mean, I was 21, my wife was 19.
Yeah.
We didn't know what we were getting. We loved each other, but we didn't know what this was about.
So that's why I put this together, because and the reason I do that is because my very first time, when I was a pastor, for the very first time, I had this couple call me, and it was late at night on like a Thursday night or a weird time, maybe even like a Tuesday night, I don't know. Like 9 o'clock at night. Never met these people. They got, back then we had house phones, so they called the house, the parsonage that we were living in. And they said, we wanted to talk to, Brother Randy, we got your number from so-and-so, I don't remember who gave it to him. We want to get married. I'm like, okay. And I said, let me see, let me get my calendar out. And then I said, when were y'all thinking you want to get married? Tomorrow. I said, tomorrow. Okay. And so it was a weird deal. They were coming from out of town. They said, I would never do this today. They said, if you'll meet us tomorrow, we're coming in early tomorrow morning. If you'll meet us at the cemetery. I'm telling you, it was like 7:30. It was very early. If you'll meet us at the cemetery, you can follow us. We want to get married on our property. It's outside of town, overlooks this beautiful bluff, and we want to get married first thing in the morning as the sun's coming up. Okay. Well, I was just, green. I didn't know what I was doing. I should have said no. Well, so I thought I'm in a little bitty car. It's dirt roads, and we're going to ways, and they stopped at some point. They're like, hey, you should get in the truck with us because your car won't make it, any further. And I'm like, okay. Like I said, I would never do this now. I wouldn't go by myself. I wouldn't get in their car. I mean, I wouldn't have ever agreed to marry them. So we get there, they pull up,
My
they
mama
said,
told me not to do that kind of
they
stuff.
said, all right, this is where we want to get married right here. And I'm like, okay. And I said, don't y'all have witnesses? No, you don't have to have witnesses in Texas, which is true. You don't have to have one. And I said, okay. So I pulled out my minister's manual. I'd never done a wedding. Oh, I don't see. I'd maybe done one wedding before. And I just read what that said to say. Pasted their names in there so I wouldn't forget. And, 5 minutes, I was done. They handed me the marriage license. I signed it. I didn't know this. As the pastor, I'm responsible for taking that marriage license and turning it in to the county clerk by mail, because they were from Houston area. So I wouldn't have been able to turn it in in person. I didn't know. I just gave it back to them. So I don't even know if they ever really recorded the wedding, the legal.
Right.
They well, they didn't. It didn't last. I heard later, from family members in town, but so I said, I need something. Well, another experience taught me I needed something. I had members of my church. Man lost his wife. She was sick and died. I did her funeral. Wasn't long, maybe a year later. He met this lady on the internet. And the family was not happy about it at all. And they called me one day at the parsonage. They said, Brother Randy, we want to come by and talk to you about getting married. I said, okay, that's fine. Meet me over at the office. I had a little bitty office. It was about the size of the kitchen. And so they sat down in there and we talked a little bit and I got to know them. I had never even met the lady. And so we talked a little bit about her background and everything. I said, so when were y'all thinking about getting married? And they were like, well, we want to do that today. I said, well, do you have a marriage license? Yeah, well, we got it already. Okay, so we went into the sanctuary and I did the service. Again, got the minister's manual, Wilbur, do you, take whatever her name is, can't be. They're still married.
Wow.
She's kind of crazy as a loon, but they're still married. And so I, at that point, put together my first, and very brief, this one's a lot more extensive, wedding policy. And that's why, and I say, if the couple's local, I'm gonna do the premarital counseling. If they live at a distance, they can find another minister that we agree on to do that. Now you can do it over Zoom, those kinds of things. I say, I put the worst case scenario. I say a total of 10 sessions is required. I want to scare them off, if at all possible, because I'd rather do 10 funerals than one wedding. I would. It's hard. And I say every session is going to be 45 minutes to an hour, and they all have to be done before 1 month before the wedding. Now, there have been times where things happen. I had a very good friend of mine in town call me and said, hey, my daughter's getting married next Saturday. This was Monday. And or Sunday night, and their minister backed out on it. Can you do it? I said, well, I require premarital counseling. Okay. And I said, I've got the books already. And I said, if they'll commit to meet with me every night this week for 5 weeks, for 5 nights, for an hour. And we talk through all of the, they have to read the book before they get here. And then we'll talk about what they've read. Because I did it different back then. I said, I'll do it. And they did. They were there every night for 5 nights. It was a horrible week. I had to do that every night. Wednesday night service. We met most of the time about 7 or 8 o'clock at night. It was horrible. And then I did the wedding on Saturday.
Are they still?
I think they are.
Got a question for you, and I don't see that covered here. It might be private for you, but when you are giving counseling to couples, what in a Reader's Digest version of what do you cover and what is your focus?
Well, if you look there on the top where it says premarital counseling materials, this is what I have done over the last several years. Now, I haven't had opportunity since I've left the church, but I use material called Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. And there is a certification that you can get through Texas Baptist, actually. Cool. That they will, at one time they would pay for it. I don't know if they still pay for it or not, but it's very inexpensive.
Meaning like as a ministry,
And
Anyone.
And Randy didn't leave.
Minister, what's that?
You said it before I left the church. He didn't actually leave the church.
No, before I left the full-time vocational ministry.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that sounded awkward.
Yeah, I'm still in the church, that's right. But I use that because it has an online survey that they do. It prints out all these results. And it gives you 5 or 6 key areas to talk about. And helps you know what to say in those, when you're discussing those things. So, it's about, just the basics of a good marriage, communication, money, sex, and it gives you all this information so that you have that before you ever even enter into the first session with them.
Wow.
And so that
That's amazing.
has been a super helpful, but even just the materials by themselves, the book, they have workbooks, those weren't that helpful. I put it on there saying they have to choose that. But saving your marriage before it starts is one of the best materials out there, I think. And it's about 8 weeks long.
It's sad that everybody doesn't.
No, the biggest thing you need to do is just have them read the whole Bible and then talk about it.
And one of the things that the last wedding that I did was in October, so fairly recent. And I've been a little wishy-washy in the past, but in recent years, I've tightened up a little bit. So 2 of the things that we do, number one, our bylaws say that, the ministers in our church will not perform weddings outside of our membership.
Yep.
So that has helped tighten up some of that. And
You can say no. I can't do that.
And not only can you say no, but if you do one type of wedding of non-members, then you can't discriminate against any other type, like Bob and Jim. So by stating that, that helps. And then the other thing is, because I'm only doing members, then I do a 4-week. And what I did was I went on the internet and I read probably realistically 8 or 10 different online marriage counseling. Some of them had 200 questions of the most ridiculous things you ever thought. Some of them were rock solid.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna be honest. I divided mine up into 4 sections, and I took some of the best questions from all of those, and I made my own.
Yeah.
And so,
That's what I did for a long time. I
Right.
did my own stuff.
but now I'm consistent. I use the same one every time. But the number one reason is because so far twice in marriage counseling, I've led the young man to Christ in marriage counseling. The female was a member of my church, so now I'm obligated to do the wedding. This wedding I did in October, both the young man and woman were both members of my church. So I was a little less concerned about the spiritual aspect because they're in church every Sunday, they both profess. So the very first session that I do is I get to know them a little bit.
Sure.
And by the end of the first session, I know whether they're believers or not. And then I spend part of each of the next 3, if one of them doesn't have an open profession, that comes up in every session. And I told one guy, we've got 3 weeks. 3 weeks for you to understand why you need to be the spiritual head of this home, why you need to know who Jesus is. And he came into the last section. I thought he was gonna pray. He didn't. And when they got ready to leave, I was wondering, how am I gonna address this? And as we were getting ready to leave, he said, Pastor, I'll see you in service tomorrow. Well, he never came to church.
Right.
So I thought, oh, okay, he's gonna make a public profession down the aisle. So at the end of the service, we're singing the 4th stanza of Just As I Am.
Waiting on him.
He ain't never come down the house. Afterwards, I just walked up and I said, you told me that you grew up around the church, that you believe what the Bible says. What's holding you back? And he said, I really don't know. I said, don't you think it's time to get it right? And he said, yeah. I said, let's go to my office. And he broke down like a baby. This was a big old bodybuilding guy. I mean, his arms were big as my head. That's pretty big, you know. And he just broke down in tears and he gave himself to Christ, you know. So 2 of the weddings that I did in recent past, I led the young man to Christ.
Well, you know, one of my last weddings that I did at my first church. In fact, I'd already moved here and went back and did the wedding with this couple. You know, the young man was ex-military and I think, let's see, they already had a child together.
Mhm.
Is that right? Yeah, they already had a child together, and I think she was pregnant again. Anyway, real nice couple. They've been coming to our church, and so he wanted to meet with, you know, I think I initiated a meeting with him, you know, about salvation. You know, hey, y'all been coming and wanted to find out more, and you know, so we talked about their salvation experience, and he said, I'm not, you know, a believer in you. So I got to lead him to the Lord. Well, after we did that, you know, and he, you know, wants to be baptized and everything, we're leaving my office, and he says, yeah, and we need to get married, you know, and I said, yeah, I can help you with that too, you know. And so I did their wedding, and they're still together and still active in the church, and you know, so you can go both ways. I went from salvation to getting them married, you know, or you can go from getting them married to
I think it's like, according to some bylaws, you wouldn't have been able to do the baptism.
Correct.
Until they were married.
Right. Some that's true. Some say you have to be Christian.
But one of the reasons that we do what I was talking about earlier is because of that, same-sex marriage.
Well, and I have an updated version of this
Amen.
wedding policy that I did after one of these sessions. And I just put, you know, that I used a lot of that letter that's in there from Dr. Rayner, and that's his letter he sent to every couple who asked him to do their wedding, and he would just say, if you don't meet these standards, I won't do it. But I put in here on mine, you know, how that I was honored to participate in their wedding, you know, and why it's important and those kinds of things. But I've said I do not perform civil unions, so that's, you know, ceremonies without a marriage license for anyone, members or non-members. Because I had a lady call me one time from our community. She wanted to marry this man and but not have a wedding, not have a license. And I said, I'm not going to do that. You know, I said, I just don't feel comfortable. You know, married in the eyes of God, whatever. But I just said I'm not comfortable doing that. So I just put that in there. I don't do civil unions, and I do not perform marriage ceremonies if the couple is of the same sex.
Is that what they're called, civil unions, when they don't do it through the civil registrar?
Right.
They just do
The
church ceremony.
just do the church ceremony. I mean, that's what I call it. I don't know if that's the official title or not.
Okay, I'm acquainted with the term.
The reason that they would do that, I had two people so far approach me. One of the ladies in the church said that the reason that her and the gentleman that was her boyfriend, whatever you want to call it, she drew military benefits from her deceased husband. So if she actually married him, she would lose those benefits. And this is what she said: we're not sexually active, so it doesn't matter. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to participate in it.
Yeah.
Number one, if the law of the land does not go against the law of God, then you're to abide by the law of the land. And the law of the land says that we should have a license to show that we're legally married. And they're putting mammon over.
Well, they're defrauding.
Yeah.
And they're defrauding the government
Right.
over the deal.
Right.
Maybe it's
so-
conflicts with all this.
But both of them are older. They were in their mid-70s. Both of them were widow and widower. So it's not like they did something. There's no infidelity type thing here. And they don't stay at each other's. They fully have different homes. So they felt like they're right in the eyes of God. And I don't think that's necessarily right. So
Well, yeah, I agree. I wouldn't have done it either.
if you're presenting yourself and living like a married couple, whether you're having sex or not, doesn't matter.
Right.
So
Yeah, I love doing weddings, but there's two of them that I regret. I don't think that the couple lasted. And then those two, there was no marriage counseling. I was rushed into doing their wedding, and I will not do it again.
Right.
My wife and I, we came out with our own curriculum, so, and we give them. I mean, Kelly had to go through it. She didn't
Yeah.
finish, but she had to go through it. But she's still married. She's still married.
I have to say, I was gonna say, me and my husband did not do marriage counseling before we got married. Because when we decided to get married, the Lord told me, okay, he's the one, and then I was like, oh, okay. And pretty much like 2 days later, we went to the court and got married.
Oh, okay.
And we were supposed to get married to the church before COVID. That month before COVID hit, boom, they called me back and they're like, oh, we gotta return everything because they're closing down. I was like, so I still have my wedding dress that I have not worn, okay?
Wow.
But we started doing marriage counseling with my cousin, and it really did make a big difference.
We're all.
Yes.
Yeah, it really did make a big difference in how, mainly me, because I have been married before, so many failures before, I say, and I definitely did not want the same mistakes to be carried on to this one. And more since I know it was God, it was
Right.
God's will. So I was like, no, things have to be different. So it has helped us immensely.
Yeah.
So we're very blessed in that sense.
But if we could enrich our knowledge, that's what I'm curious about. Like, what was your focus in the areas that you covered?
Yeah.
Which you satisfied some of that. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, the number
How to
one
compare
cause for
best.
divorce is not infidelity, it's finances.
Yes,
So ours,
communication.
Communication is the big one that I cover. Money,
Yeah.
is one that I cover. Spiritual, unity is one that I cover.
Yep.
children, do you want children?
Yeah, and that's again, communication can be involved around finance, can
Yep.
involve around children, but definitely, those three key areas, definitely cover, regardless of whatever curriculum I'm using.
Mhm.
I just like the way, Dr. Leslie Parrott do lay it all out. They just have it broken up.
They've got a whole, they
Yeah.
got books on
Books and,
being a couple in the
Yeah.
Lord and, yeah.
right.
Questions about this, so did you send the couples to read this book? Or
I
what?
always get them to read the book.
Mhm.
The online little thing is very helpful for me.
Oh,
Because
okay.
they just answer a bunch of questions and it prints out a really nice report, that I can use to say, here's, their personality type, it goes into some pretty specific stuff about, how they might communicate. Or, when there's a disagreement, those kinds of things, so
Got quiz kind of a thing.
it is,
So they have to do.
they
the
take it
quiz.
separate, yeah, and then
Yeah, that's how mine
it
is.
kind of puts it does all the tabulations
One of
for
the
you.
things that I learned from that, which were two different personalities.
Yeah.
And he said, you're gonna be like this.
Yeah.
For a time. And he said,
Right.
but you'll come, but you'll be ready.
Right.
And that's where we're at.
Yeah. But if you look up, they call it SIMUS, but it's saving your marriage before it starts. That's what it all stands
Well, aren't you, I'm almost positive you've given the example in the past, like you or your wife, one is a spender, one isn't.
we've come to that kind of
Right.
idea, but when we first started, I was a spender.
She was
a
frugal
saver.
because
Oh, yeah,
you came
because she
from a
came from a
poor-
very back, not a poor background, but just the money was tight.
Neither, yeah.
And I wasn't rich by any stretch of imagination, but, we went out to eat every Friday night. And she went out to eat, pizza from Pizza Hut.
Once in a blue moon.
Once a month was a big treat, and they didn't even do it every month,
Wow.
and so, yeah.
They shared a pan pizza.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I could just see Randy, hey, let's get a pizza, and she's like,
It's not
it's not
time.
the end of the month.
Yeah. So, wedding policy, for sure, also the church needs a wedding policy, and they kind of need to go together, kind of like what Carl was saying. Our wedding policy that we developed as a church was just that the pastor would not perform any weddings outside the church. Trying to, again, was it directed against same-sex marriage, so that the pastor of the church was not allowed to conduct a same-sex marriage. period. You know, mine
Right.
says that personally, but
Right.
let's say you had a pastor in the church who was okay with that, then they couldn't go as a representative of the church and do that, you know. Obviously, it'd be grounds for dismissal if that was the case, but, so wedding policies from for the church, I think that's included in this packet too.
One of the things that our church did when the church used to be open to outside weddings, if you weren't a member, then they charged you for the use of the chapel, they charged you for the use of the fellowship hall. Well, when our bylaws were changed to members only, that eliminated all of that except a $50 cleaning fee that went to our cleaning folks if you didn't clean it, because then we gotta bring them in.
Right.
So, that eliminated half of our wedding policy was a big old packet, no alcohol.
Yeah.
You know, you still need a wedding policy, but it cut that thing down probably 3/4 when we said members only.
No wine to bless the food?
Yeah. But they want to have the Lord's Supper, yeah. They're like,
No wine with a supper?
Yeah, they're like, hey, cake is for the Lord's Supper, Pastor. It's a 7-course.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nothing to do with the weddings or anything, but I just want to find out if it was wrong from my part. I went to a
You're asking it probably.
I had somebody get married, family member, and they're gay. Nobody in the family went. Me and my wife went just to be there.
Wow.
Simply because in my mind, I love this person
Right.
with all my heart.
Sure.
I don't agree with their lifestyle, but I love her.
Right.
And just to be support there and show her, you know what? We love you, we care for you. You don't agree with me, but was that wrong?
Does she know that you don't agree?
Oh, she knows,
She
yeah,
knows.
she
Okay.
knows where we stand. And she was raised in church, so
Yeah.
she knows the word.
Yeah, she knows right from
I'm
wrong.
good
Yeah.
with it.
But a lot of people criticized me,
Oh, I'm sure.
but the way I looked at it, I repeat, I love her.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, the hard thing with that is
Mhm.
not showing that, not
condone.
condoning it while you're there or being a part of it and
Right.
rather just being there for the person.
Yeah,
Right.
nobody went. I mean, her
That's a
father,
big
mother,
controversial
nobody.
thing that's in the news right now with Amy Grant. You know, that, I don't know if you've seen that, but from the Christian realm, that's what she's being chastised for, is going to gay weddings. And, you know, I don't know, like Tom gives an illustration about going to one of his cousins' graduation.
Yeah.
And that's a different thing. That's an accomplishment he did as an individual. He went to support. And Tom said his dad didn't agree with that. I wouldn't have a problem probably with the graduation, with a wedding, that I would have a hard time with that. I mean, I just would.
It would be hard.
But-
Yeah, I'm wrestling that with my daughter because she's transgender and getting married whenever they're having issues, so I'm glad they're not getting married right now. I'm glad, I mean, but, you know, how do I support one, but without supporting what they're doing? Because if I show up, then does that show that I agree with it? I'm wrestling with that every day.
I don't think
I
you
think
show that you agree with it.
That's right.
I just think that it's showing her that you love her.
But I think you have to be up front and say,
Right.
I'm here today
Well,
because I love you.
Because I love you.
Yeah.
I don't.
But I don't
agree with
agree with
this
what you're
happening
doing.
right
She
here.
knows
I told them that.
And so I think I would go.
Yeah,
I think I would go, not just to anybody's, not just a
Right.
close friend, but if it was a family member that I cared about, had a good relationship with,
Right.
and they knew how I
And we
believed,
have a great relationship.
I would go.
yeah.
But, because and the reason I say that, we had these 4 men that lived together. They were next door to our church in Holland, and just down the road. And they were something else. I mean,
Fabulous.
just unbelievable. Horrible. They were really horrible people. And so caused a lot of controversy in town. And so one day, right after they moved in there, I didn't really know who lived there. I knew at least 2 men lived there. You know, passing by, seeing more, and they're all living in there. And it was obvious that they were homosexual. Well, one night I was leaving the church and one of them was outside, and I just stopped and rolled down the window and said, "Hey, I'm Randy Evans. I'm the pastor up here at the church, and wanted to welcome you to our community, and want to invite you to our church." And he said, "Oh, I don't think you would want us to come to your church." And I said, "Yeah, we would." And he said, "Well, you probably wouldn't agree with the lifestyle that we've chosen." And I said, "Well, you're right. We don't agree with it. Absolutely." And I said, "I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the church." I said, "But you are more than welcome at any time to come to our church and worship with us." And I said, "If someone is not welcoming to you, you let me know and I'll take care of it."
We have the same thing in ours,
But they knew and I told them, I said, "You're right. I don't agree with you. We don't agree with that. But that doesn't mean you're not welcome at our church."
Right.
They never came. They never came. They gave us some stuff one time when they were moving, and we were kind of glad to see them go. They gave us some stuff that we used in our Christmas decorating and things like that. But
if we don't let
they
it,
said when they left, they said, "Thank you for being a good neighbor to us." And I was like, "Well, that's what we're here for," But I wasn't
That's what I
sad
mean.
that they left.
How can we say that we're Christians and we love everyone but yet when we see people like them, we emulate them or make them feel bad or
Right.
whatever. I don't think that really we can't call ourselves Christians, because I feel like if Jesus was walking now with us, he would stop and talk to them.
Sure.
He would hang with them, and
Right.
you know what I mean? So I feel that
But they would know where he stood.
right, but they would know where he stands.
But we don't have the middle ground of that. You've got the extremes who are
I
just
know.
Right,
Christian and totally okay with whatever, and then
Right.
you got the other extreme that just beat everybody up.
right.
So there's a homeless guy that's been sleeping in front of our church named
Oh, wow.
Lloyd. And well, there's two of them, but for about 2 months now, he's been attending. Yeah. So,
He's been attending the church?
yeah.
No, outside of church.
Oh,
Hey, Carl, when he first met the guy, he was sleeping right in front of the door of the
Right.
church, so he couldn't even get in the door to unlock everything.
But anyway, when I first approached him, he was kind of aggressive. And I said, "Hey, can I not shake your hand? Will you shake my hand?" And so he did. And then after that, I got to talk to him after about the third week. I said, "Hey, you're welcome to come in to the church."
Oh, wow.
And he's like, "Well, I thought about it, but I was scared." And I said, "You should never be scared to come into the
Amen.
church."
right.
So I said, "As a matter of fact, 2 churches meet here. One speaks Spanish and then ours. So come in and let me show you where we meet." So I because we meet at the other end of the building. So I said, "This is the door we come in." And I took him out it and I had him look around, and I said, "You just come around the building and come in this door." I said, "Our services are at 10 o'clock. So he showed up.
Really?
Well, but that day when I was leading him back out the front door, and I was talking to him, he told me, he said, I asked him if I could give him my testimony in 3 minutes. Same thing I taught in this class. And he said, "Yeah, well, I started out with, my mom and dad divorced. My dad was physical abusive alcoholic. It turned my mom to a homosexual lifestyle. And then I went from there." Well, when I got done, he said, "Sometimes I go both ways. Sometimes I like girls, sometimes I like guys." And I said, his name is Lloyd. I said, "Lloyd, I want to share something with you." I said, "Lloyd, when God made you, he broke the mold. There's not another Lloyd. He made you exactly the way he wanted to, and God does not make any mistakes. He made you in his image, and he doesn't make any mistakes." And I said, "The problem we have today is that everything that God made and said it was good, we distort and twist into something that's not supposed to be." And his eyes look like water faucets. He wouldn't really have a tear. He was streaming in tears. And so this Sunday evening, he was on dope. He was in another world. And I had to have a strong conversation with him.
Right.
And when I first talked to him, I told him that the Bible says that a dog will return to its own vomit. So Sunday evening when I went out there, he is on something. I don't know. He's on that street though. And I said, "Oh, you've been lapping up vomit, huh?" And he got mad at me. And he told me, "I think I'm gonna go to jail." And I said, "Well, that might be the best thing for you because you're not progressing here, you know." So I showed him love regardless. He's been coming to our church for at least a couple of months. I invited him to my house at Thanksgiving.
Wow,
He came.
no way.
Yes, I picked him up. I went and picked him up, brought him to my house, had to let him take a bath first. Every Sunday morning, I get to church at 7:30. Our service isn't until 10. At 8 o'clock, I let him in. He takes a shower. I got a place for him to keep his clothes. The problem is that the Christians as a whole don't know how to meet that middle ground.
Right.
How can I stand firm?
Right.
Except show the world, not lip service. Oh yeah, I love him. How? Well, he's been in my house at Christmas, he's been in my house at Thanksgiving. I let him take a shower every Sunday morning. I went to the laundromat.
Right.
I told him I said, "Put your cleanest clothes on, even your jacket is going in." We'll put it all in. While I was there, he said, "Hey, Pastor, your wife don't happen to have any Thanksgiving leftovers, does she?" And I said, "Okay, you watch it spin and I'll be back." I went and got some leftovers from the turkey and dressing. So while I'm in the laundromat, I said, "Hey, Lord," he's eating the dressing. He was like, "Oh, you and your wife are chefs." I was like, "Well, when you're on the street, anything tastes good." But this is the cool part though, and then I'll quit. But I said, "Say, Lloyd, you know Michael Jordan?" And he was like, "Yeah." I said, "Really? Y'all hang out and have coffee together?" He was like, "Man, I don't know him like that." And he steadily got the dressing going, you know. And I said, "That's how people know Jesus." And everybody's in that laundromat listening. I said, "No, that's how everybody knows Jesus. They say they know Jesus, but they don't hang out and have coffee together." See, what I want to know is, do you know Jesus? And I'm talking about, do you hang out and have coffee together? I said, "Tell me about how you actually met Jesus Christ." You could have heard a pin drop in that line. All you could hear was,
Yeah.
spinning. And this is what he said. "I was out there at that bus stop and I was really down and I was ready to end it all. I hated everything. And I remember people say, all you got to do is look up and cry out to the Lord. And so I just looked up and I cried out to God and I've been worshiping him ever since." Now, whether that's true or not, that he knows, he had a better testimony than half the Christians in my church. But yet Sunday night, he's blowing his mind out with whatever he was on. He's told me he's both ways, whichever. He told me, my wife, he said, "Everybody loves Lloyd's booty." And my wife was like, "What kind of conversations are y'all having?" I said, "Babe, we're on the street here. This is a homeless guy on dope. We have all kinds of conversations." So, but the fact that I told him God did not make a mistake with you, you're allowing the world to twist what God made good.
Right.
See, I told him God made you good. God made you in his image, and God didn't make a mistake. But the world has taken what God made good and began to twist and distort it. That man just flowed. He's about 31-year-old young black man. And so haven't given up on him.
No.
But the guy is, like I said, Sunday night, I don't know what planet he was on. You'll see him on the side of the road. He's just out there, and when you talk to him, he's praising God. He'll be walking right down the middle of the street, and he wears a turban on his head, and it might be a sweater, it might be a blanket, it might be his
Whatever
underwear.
keeps his warm.
Whatever, yeah. So,
Wow.
but he's in service every Sunday.
That's awesome.
So
Well, the seed is there.
That's right.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I just wish we had a way to help him be accountable, a little more, somebody to be there when he gets to that point where he's, or somebody's. But we can't be around him 24 hours a day.
Right.
You know what? I'm 68 years old. I met the Lord when I was 15. And few years now, I've realized that I'm not here to judge nobody.
Yeah.
I'm not. I'm not here to do the Holy Spirit work.
Right.
I'm here to lead people to God. And how do I do that? By showing them compassion and love, respect. And
Yeah,
no
there's-
point. What he says, what he talks about is true. Because I've got a lot of friends that are homosexual. I got family members that are.
Right.
I know people that are lost, but I show them who I am.
Yeah.
And I
And
respect
judging people is, you know,
We Christians tend to do that a lot.
well,
Oh, yeah.
what we have to be able to do though, that's the most misquoted passage of scripture outside of I can do all things through Christ. Jesus said, before you talk about the speck in your brother's eye, remove the log that is in your own. Judge not, that's what he said. But if you actually read the second part of that, he says, first, remove the log out of your own eye so that you can properly see
Yeah,
to
discern.
judge
Yeah.
the speck in your brother's eye. And what that means is we're to make righteous judgment. Every time you look at something and say that's right or wrong, you've made a judgment. Condemning someone to hell
That's right.
is Jesus Christ's job.
Amen.
That kind of judgment is not for any of us.
Correct.
The best lady, 90-something years old, they just did a write-up in the Temple paper about her, Dorothy McDonald. She taught Sunday school for 60-something years. She's 90-something years old at Moffitt. They just recognized her. She said this one time, I know that my job isn't to judge anybody, but the Bible says we will know them by their fruit, and I'm just being a fruit inspector.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I heard that one too.
Yeah.
I heard that one.
Jesus said what? They will know you by
By-
your fruit.
Yep.
So we will know a child of the devil and a child of God by what? Their fruit. So that's not me condemning you to hell. That's just saying, according to the Bible, that's
That's
not right.
Yeah.
That's where we need to be.
And this is the part
In
that
love.
is very
In love.
difficult because we are aspiring ministers. And so it's quite interesting because you being there for someone that you don't agree with their lifestyle and they know that you don't agree, but you're there. He shows the love of Christ because you're there. But at the same time, witness is two things.
Mhm.
Witness is to proclaim the gospel, but it's also being a contrast of what they're not doing and what they're heading because you're there. So it's at the same time that is love, it's a contrast for them to know, like, I know he's here and it makes me uncomfortable because it's reminding me of what I'm not doing right.
Exactly.
And so that is true witness as well. And it's a difficult thing. Now, as pastors becomes even more complicated
Yes.
because we need to make judgments when all of a sudden there's a couple that wants us to baptize somebody that is gay.
Yeah.
Or they want us to perform a wedding.
Yeah.
Or they want to go into ministry when they're
Yeah,
doing
I know.
I mean, right now, just the hardest part, I never had such a hard time in the Bible to go through it with a group is with the English group of the Bible study on Thursdays. We're going through Romans 1.
Yeah.
And the point of it is that
Yeah.
the point of it is that because they abandoned the Lord, they abandoned the idea of God, they lost their purpose and design. And so they went into a homosexual lifestyle. Now, how do you say that in today's society without, getting
Being
yourself
accused,
into even
hate
a
speech.
possibility of a legal retaliation? And so it is when you actually look at the chapter and you see that not even God makes that as the main point of the chapter. He makes it that God is having patience because the goodness of God is what leads you to repentance. So that's the thesis of the whole thing. So it's the thing that is true. We are not to do God's judgment because only He can do it, but we do get to judge as God leads us to do it, and we do it righteously and with love because we do need to tell. It will be unloving not to tell.
Right.
That'll be the wrong thing to do, but not, you understand.
Yeah, I know what you
And it gets very complicated.
I don't think they don't know it. They do know.
They do.
Like, it's like you telling them, it's like, most of them, they know that they are doing wrong.
Yeah.
They know.
Well, it's like you just said, when they see you, they
Yeah,
know.
the contrast.
You know.
And they're forced to make a decision.
Your presence is preaching at them, and
And for all of those on the video, that's all free.
Maybe they don't have to deal with that as much. That we do in society. I don't know.
They, yeah. I think that, more people there would accept the fact that it's wrong,
Correct.
but they still, in Uganda, definitely deal
Mhm.
with it. But in some parts of Uganda, it's illegal.
Correct.
So, you know, sodomy used to be illegal here.
Right.
We changed that
Right.
law as well.
Well, everything is changing now,
Mhm.
and I see just that sin multiply, that's all. We're set.
Right. All right. Well, let me pray for us.
All right.
Father, thank you for today, for just the opportunities that you give us to be salt and light to a dark world. And pray, Father, that you'd help us as we have opportunities to do weddings and preach funerals, to point others to you through those important moments in the lives of others. And through the Lord's Supper, through baptism, all of those areas of ministry. Father, we pray that you'd help us to live lives that glorify you, and Lord, that we would be the greatest witness that people see, and that they would know something's different because of who Jesus Christ is. We pray all of this in Jesus' most holy and precious name.
When I was
Thank you.
when I was at